Put your hand flat on your chest for a moment. Not because I am going to make you do a breathing exercise. I just want you to notice something that is happening whether you notice it or not. Somewhere under your ribs, a small clump of cells is ticking away, and it has never once in your entire life asked your permission. It just keeps going. And here is the strange little fact I want to hand you gently before you drift off tonight. That ticking is not steady. It is not a clock. It never has been. Let me ask you the simplest possible question about it. What happens to your heartbeat when you breathe in? And what happens when you breathe out? Most people, if you stop them on the street, will say, well, nothing much. The heart just beats and the breathing just happens, and they are two separate machines minding their own business. That is the obvious answer. It is also wrong. And the way it is wrong is so gentle and so quiet that you can lie here in the dark and catch it happening in your own body right now. Breathe in slowly. As the air goes in, your heart speeds up, just a little. Breathe out slowly. As the air goes out, your heart slows down. In, faster. Out, slower. It is doing this on every single breath, all day, all night, while you eat, while you argue, while you sleep. Your pulse is riding up and down on your breath like a small boat on a slow swell, and almost nobody feels it, because it is subtle and because we were never told to look. This little rise and fall has a name, and it is a clumsy name, so bear with me. It is called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Respiratory meaning it comes from breathing. Sinus, because it comes from a particular spot in the heart called the sinoatrial node, which is the heart's own little pacemaker. And arrhythmia, meaning the rhythm is not perfectly even. Now that last word, arrhythmia, is a bad word for it, because arrhythmia usually means something is wrong with your heart. And here, nothing is wrong. In fact, this unevenness is a sign that everything is right. It is so much a sign of health that in the year 2025, a whole panel of experts got together and formally suggested we stop calling it an arrhythmia at all and call it respiratory heart rate variability instead, precisely so people would stop thinking a healthy heart is a broken one. I love that. A group of serious scientists sat in a room and essentially agreed we gave this beautiful thing a frightening name and we ought to fix that. So let us sit with the plain fact first, before we go digging into why. Your heart rate goes up when you inhale and down when you exhale, and the size of that up and down swing is biggest in the young and the fit, and it shrinks, it fades, in people whose hearts are struggling. It is one of the oldest tricks in the whole animal kingdom. Every creature that breathes air, every one, from a lizard on a warm rock to a sparrow to you, does the same little dance between lung and heart. It is hundreds of millions of years old. It is riding up and down in your chest tonight, and it was doing the same thing in some scaly ancestor long before there were people to name it. Now here is where it stops being just a pretty fact and starts being useful. If your heart already slows down every time you breathe out, then what happens if you make your out breath longer? What happens if you spend twice as long letting the air leave as you spend pulling it in? You would guess, if the effect is real, that a longer exhale would give the slowing part more time to work. And you would be right. In a way, we will spend a long calm while untangling tonight, because the honest answer turns out to be more interesting than a simple yes. Let me give you one number to hold on to, because it is the number that makes people sit up. In one study, they took 48 healthy adults, average age around 27, and had them do nothing more exotic than breathe slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth, at about 6 breaths a minute for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. And their heart rate, on average, fell from about 79 beats a minute to about 70 beats a minute. That is a drop of almost 9 beats a minute. Call it 8.8 to be exact about it. No pill, no machine strapped to the chest, no needle, just air moved slowly on a particular schedule. Their blood pressure came down a little too, both the top number and the bottom number, which we will get to. But the heart rate is the headline. 9 beats a minute, gone in 5 minutes, using nothing but the timing of a breath. Now, when I hear a claim like that, my first instinct is to be suspicious. Not rude about it, just careful, because the world is full of people who will sell you a breathing trick and a bridge to go with it. So the question I want to chew on with you tonight slowly is not just does it work? The question is why on earth would it work? Why should the length of your out-breath reach all the way down into your heart and put a hand on the pacemaker and say, easy now, slow down? What is the actual chain of cause and effect? What connects the air leaving your mouth to a cluster of cells in your heart deciding to wait a little longer before the next beat? Because there must be a chain. That is the thing about this business we are in. Nature does not do magic. When you see one thing reliably follow another, there is always a set of gears turning in between, even if you cannot see them. And in this case, the gears are astonishing. They run from the deepest, oldest part of your brain, down a nerve that wanders halfway through your body, across a tiny gap using a specific molecule as a key, into a specific lock, which opens a specific little door in the wall of a heart cell and lets a specific kind of charged particle leak out. And every one of those steps has been measured. We know how long each step takes, down to fractions of a second. We are going to walk that whole chain together, one link at a time, and by the end you will understand, really understand, not just believe, why breathing out slowly puts the brakes on your heart. But I want to build it up honestly, and that means I am going to argue with myself along the way, because here is a little trap waiting for us. It is very easy to say, longer exhale, slower heart, therefore the longer your exhale the better, breathe out for a count of 100 and live forever. And the real science does not say anything so tidy. There are 2 careful studies I want to tell you about, done by good people, and they flatly disagree with each other about whether the 2-to-1 ratio, the breathing out twice as long as you breathe in, actually matters more than simply breathing slowly. One says the ratio is the key. The other says, no, it is the slowness that matters, and the ratio is almost beside the point once you are breathing slowly enough. 2 good experiments, 2 different answers. That is not a failure of science. That is science being honest with us about a subtle thing. And we are going to sit right in the middle of that disagreement and see what it teaches us. So that is our evening. We start with a plain observation, the one happening in your chest right now. Then we go looking for the machinery. We climb down into the brainstem to find the little cluster of cells that acts as a gatekeeper for every heartbeat. We follow the long wandering nerve that carries its orders. We watch a single molecule land on a single receptor and open a single channel. We time the whole thing, because the timing is the secret to why a slow breath works and a fast breath does not. And then, only then, once we understand the gears, we come back up to the surface and ask the practical question. Does breathing out twice as long really drop your heart rate? And if so, by how much and for how long, and what is actually doing the work? There is no rush tonight. If your mind wanders off and comes back, that is fine. That is what this is for. We have all the time in the world, and the whole point is to move slowly, the way a long exhale moves slowly. So let us start where all good physics starts, which is not with the answer, but with a plain, stubborn, ordinary fact sitting right in front of us. Your heart is speeding up a little as you breathe in, and slowing down a little as you breathe out, and it is doing it right now, and it has been doing it your whole life, and until a few minutes ago you had no idea. Let us find out why. Put a hand flat on your chest if you like, though you do not have to move at all. You can do this entirely inside your own attention, lying still. What I want you to notice is not your heartbeat by itself, because everyone has felt that. The little thump against the ribs, the drum you carry around all day and mostly ignore. No. What I want you to notice is something a layer deeper than that, something you have never been taught to look for. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I want you to notice the spacing between the thumps, not the thumps, the gaps. Because here is the ordinary stubborn fact I promised you. Those gaps are not equal. They are not evenly spaced like the ticking of a wall clock. They stretch and they shrink gently over and over, and they do it in time with your breath. When the air is flowing into you, the gaps get a little shorter, the beats crowd closer together, the drum quickens ever so slightly, and when the air is flowing back out of you, the gaps open up, the beats spread apart, the drum eases off. In and quicken. Out and slow. In and quicken. Out and slow. Your heart is breathing along with your lungs, in its own way, and it always has been. Now, I am not asking you to take my word for this on faith. If you breathe slowly and pay very close attention, some of you will actually feel it tonight, this quickening on the way in and this easing on the way out. Most of you will not feel it directly, and that is completely normal, because the change is small and our senses are coarse. But it is there. It has been measured 1,000 times over. When you strap a person to the instruments and you watch the heart beat by beat, you see this wave in the rhythm as plain as ripples on a pond. The instruments do not lie. The heart speeds and slows, riding up and down on the tide of the breath. This wave has a name, a rather ugly and off-putting name that we will fix later in the evening, but for now, let me just tell you the plain physics of what it is. It is an oscillation. That is a word physicists love, because oscillations are everywhere, and they are the most reliable friends we have. A child on a swing oscillates. A plucked guitar string oscillates. The water sloshing back and forth in a bathtub oscillates. And your heart rate, it turns out, oscillates too, and the thing pushing it, the hand giving the swing its push, is your own breathing. Breathe in, the rate rides up. Breathe out, the rate rides down. It is a swing, and your breath is the child pumping their legs, and we are going to spend a good long while tonight figuring out exactly how the legs connect to the swing. Let me give you a first taste of why any of this should matter to you, lying there in the dark. Somebody took a group of 48 healthy young adults, ordinary people, average age somewhere in the middle 20s, and they measured their heart rates sitting quietly. On average, the hearts were beating about 78 or 79 times a minute. A perfectly normal resting pulse. Nothing special. Then they had these people breathe in a particular slow way, which we will take apart piece by piece later, for just 5 minutes. 5 minutes of slow breathing. And they measured again. And the average heart rate had fallen to about 70 beats a minute. It dropped by nearly 9 beats a minute. 9 beats, just from changing the way the air moved. No drug, no exercise, no cold water, just breathing, slowly, for the length of time it takes to soft boil an egg. I want you to sit with how strange that is, because we tend to think of our heart rate as something that happens to us, not something we do. It races when we are frightened and we feel helpless about it. It pounds when we climb the stairs and we did not ask it to. It seems to belong to the automatic machinery, the part of us that runs whether we are paying attention or not, the same part that digests our dinner and grows our fingernails and keeps our body warm without ever once consulting us. And mostly that is true. You cannot decide to digest faster, you cannot will your fingernails to grow. But the heart, it turns out, has a back door, and the key to that back door is the breath. Through the breath, and almost only through the breath, you can reach into that automatic machinery and give the dial a turn. That is the little miracle we are chasing tonight. But before we get greedy and start turning dials, I want to slow us down, because there is a subtle mistake waiting for us here, and I would rather we avoid it from the start. The mistake is to imagine that a resting heart is supposed to be a metronome, a perfectly even tick, 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 and that this breathing wave is some kind of wobble or floor riding on top of a beat that ought to be steady. That is exactly backwards, and getting it backwards will spoil your whole understanding of the thing. So let us kill that idea right now, gently, the way you would blow out a candle. Picture a metronome, the little pyramid that sits on the piano and swings its arm. Tock, 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 dead even, mechanical, indifferent. Now, we admire that in a machine. We want our clocks even. We want the crankshaft in our car to turn smoothly. Evenness in a machine is a sign that it is working. And so, quite naturally, we assume evenness in a heart must also be a sign that it is working, that the healthiest heart is the one that beats the most like a metronome, click after identical click, never varying. And that, as it happens, is not just wrong, it is almost precisely the opposite of the truth. A heart that beats like a metronome, a heart whose beats are all exactly evenly spaced no matter what the breath is doing, is not a healthy heart at all. It is very often a heart in trouble. When physicians look at a failing heart, one of the warning signs they see is that this breathing wave, this speeding and slowing, has gone flat. The rhythm has become monotonous. The gaps have all become equal. The oscillation we started the evening by noticing has faded away. So the very wobble you were tempted to dismiss as noise is in fact a signature of health. The big, generous breathing swing in the heartbeat is a mark of a young and fit and well-regulated system. The flat, even metronome beat can be a mark of a system that has lost its flexibility. Why on earth should that be? Why should a living pump want to be uneven when every machine we build to be smooth? Hold that question. It is one of the good ones, and we will earn a real answer to it before the night is out. For now, let me just plant the idea and let it take root while you drift. Life is not a machine that runs at one speed. Life is a thing that constantly adjusts, that leans into every little change in its circumstances, that is always making small corrections, beat by beat, breath by breath. Stiffness is death. Suppleness is life. And nowhere is that written more clearly than in the gaps between your heartbeats, which are supple, which flex with every breath, which refuse, thank goodness, to be a metronome. So let us take that as our foundation and build on it. Your heart is not keeping strict time. It is playing something more like a slow, breathing music, rising a little and falling a little in a rhythm set by your lungs. And the thing about that rhythm, the thing that makes tonight worth staying up for, or rather worth falling asleep to, is that you can conduct it. You cannot stop your heart or start it. You cannot pick its tempo by simple command the way you pick a track of music. But you can lengthen the falling part of the wave, the slowing part, the part that happens as you breathe out. You can lean on the exhale, make it long and smooth and unhurried, and when you do, you tip the balance of that oscillation towards slowness. You spend more of each breath on the downward slope, the easing slope, the resting slope, and the heart, riding that slope, settles. That is the whole secret stated once plainly before we have earned it. The rest of the night is us earning it. Because I could just tell you that and send you off to sleep, but that would be a cheat, and worse than a cheat, it would be forgettable. A trick you are handed is a trick you lose. A mechanism you understand all the way down, gear by gear, from the air in your throat to a single molecule bumping into a single gate on a single cell in the corner of your heart, that is a thing you keep. That is the difference between memorizing that the exhale slows the heart and understanding why so deeply that you could have figured it out yourself. So we are going to go down. Down from the breath in your chest to the machinery that turns breath into heartbeat. And the first stop, the very first thing standing between your lungs and your pulse, is a small knot of nerve cells tucked into the lowest, oldest part of your brain. Sitting there in the dark of your skull, quietly deciding dozens of times a minute whether to press the brake on your heart or let it off. It has a strange name, and it lives in a strange neighborhood, and it does one of the most important jobs in your whole body, and almost nobody has ever heard of it. Let us go and meet it. Picture the underside of your brain, the part that would rest against the roof of your mouth if your skull were hollow and you could look straight up through it. Right there, where the brain narrows and gathers itself into the thick cable of the spinal cord, there is a swelling, a bulge about the size of your thumb. The old anatomists called it the medulla oblongata, which is a mouthful, and all it really means is the long marrow, the long inner part. It is the oldest piece of you in a sense. It was running the show long before you could think a single thought, long before you had any opinions about anything. It handles the business you would never want to be in charge of consciously, because you would forget and then you would die. It keeps you breathing while you sleep. It keeps your blood moving. It is the night watchman who never takes a break, never gets bored, never wonders what it all means. It just tends the machinery. And tucked into this old watchman, off to the side in a loose and scattered tangle of cells that the anatomists named the reticular formation, which means something like the little net, there sits our gatekeeper. It lives high up in this medulla, toward the top, toward the brain, and it sits just behind another little landmark, a small oval bump called the inferior olive, named that because somebody long ago thought it looked like an olive, and the name stuck the way these names do. So if you wanted directions, you would say, go to the long marrow, climb toward the top, move off to the side away from the middle, and look just behind the olive. And there, in that quiet corner, you would find a thin column of nerve cells with a name that I have always found rather beautiful. The nucleus ambiguus. Ambiguous. The uncertain one. The one that is hard to make out. Now, why on earth would you name a piece of the brain after being unclear? It is not because the cells are confused, they know exactly what they are doing. It is because when the early microscope people were slicing up the brainstem and staining it and squinting at it, this particular group of cells did not have sharp edges. It did not sit in a tidy little clump you could circle with a pencil. It faded into its surroundings. Its borders were vague. You could not quite say where it began and where it ended. So they threw up their hands and called it the ambiguous nucleus, the group of cells whose outline we cannot pin down. And I love that, because it is a little monument to honesty. Instead of pretending they understood, they wrote their confusion right into the name, and there it stays to this day, an old shrug carved in Latin. But do not let the modest name fool you. This vague little column has a very sharp job. Certain cells inside it are wired directly to your heart. Not to the whole heart, not to every muscle fiber. They run to one very specific spot. A little patch of special tissue up in the upper right chamber of the heart, a patch about the size of a grain of rice, and that patch is the thing that sets the pace for the whole organ. It is the drummer. Every heartbeat you have ever had began there as a tiny electrical tick that spreads out across the muscle and squeezes it. We will spend real time with that little drummer later, because it is one of the loveliest pieces of machinery in all of biology. For now, just hold this picture. There is a drummer in your heart, keeping time. And there is a nerve running down from this ambiguous nucleus in your brainstem, reaching all the way to that drummer, whispering in its ear. And what it whispers is, slow down. That is the whole relationship, really. The nucleus ambiguus is the hand that rests on the drummer's shoulder and says, easy, easy, not so fast. It is the brake. And here is the thing that took people a long time to appreciate, and that I want to plant in you right now, because everything else grows out of it. That hand is not resting lightly. It is not sitting there idle, waiting for an emergency. Right now, as you lie here breathing slowly in the dark, that hand is pressing. It is pressing steadily on your heart, holding it back, keeping it slower than it would otherwise run. Your heart, left entirely to itself, with no nerves talking to it at all, would not beat at the calm pace you feel now. It would race. That little drummer, if nobody were holding his shoulder, would keep time at something like 100 beats a minute, maybe more, all day long, for no reason, just because that is its natural free tempo. We know this. We are not guessing. There is a drug, an old one, called atropine, and one of the things atropine does is block the whisper. It plugs its ears, so to speak. It stops the message from getting through from the nerve to the heart. And when you give somebody a good dose of atropine, something striking happens. Their heart speeds up. It jumps, sometimes by 20, 30, 40 beats a minute, all on its own, with no exercise, no fear, no coffee. The person is just lying there and their pulse climbs. Why? Because you have taken the hand off the shoulder. You have released the brake that was pressing the whole time, and now the little drummer is free to run at its own eager natural tempo, which turns out to be much faster than the pace you live at. Sit with that for a moment, because it turns your ordinary idea of the heart upside down. You probably think of your resting heartbeat as the heart's natural rest, its idle, its quiet baseline, and of a fast beat as something added on, something you have to work up to by running or climbing stairs or getting frightened. But it is closer to the other way round. The fast beat is the heart's natural state. The calm, slow, resting pulse you enjoy is something imposed on it, held down, produced actively every single second by a nerve pressing the brake. Your calm is not the absence of effort. Your calm is a job that some part of you is doing for you tirelessly without your knowledge while you sleep. There is a foot on the pedal the whole night through. If it ever fully lifted, your heart would gallop. The scientists have a name for this steady pressing. They call it vagal tone. Tone, in the way a musician might mean it, or the way you would talk about muscle tone. A background state of gentle constant readiness, neither fully on nor fully off, but always present, always holding. And this word vagal points us straight to the next character in the story, because the nerve that carries the whisper, the actual physical cable that runs from our ambiguous nucleus down to the drummer in the heart, has a name too, and it is one of the great names in all of anatomy. It is called the vagus. Now, vagus is just the old word for wandering. It is the same root that gives us vagabond, the wanderer, the drifter, and vague, again the vague one, the one that does not go straight. And it earned that name honestly, because unlike most of the nerves that reach out from the brain and go to some tidy nearby destination, the eye, the tongue, a muscle in the face, this one does not stay home. It leaves the skull through a little hole at the base, and then it wanders. It goes down the neck. It sends branches to the throat, to the voice box, so that when you speak, you are using it. It reaches the heart, which is our business tonight. But it does not stop at the heart. It keeps going. Down into the chest, out to the lungs, down through the great sheet of muscle under your ribs, into the belly, to the stomach, to the gut, winding along the intestines. One nerve, wandering through nearly the whole trunk of your body, touching organ after organ, a single drifting wire connecting the old watchman in your skull to the deep machinery of your insides. It is a two-way road, this wire, and that will matter enormously later, because messages do not only travel down it from brain to body, they travel up it too, from body to brain, and that upward traffic turns out to be a huge part of the story of why a long, slow breath can calm your whole mind. But hold that thought. For now, follow just the downward direction, the command going out. The nucleus ambiguous decides to press the brake a little harder. It fires off its cells. The signal races down the wandering vagus, down the neck, into the chest, and arrives at the heart at that grain of rice drummer. And here the electricity has to stop, because the nerve does not actually touch the drummer. There is a gap, a tiny, tiny gap, far too small to see, but real, a little cleft between the end of the nerve and the surface of the heart cell. The messages come all this way as a pulse of electricity, and now it hits a wall of empty space it cannot jump. So how does the whisper cross the gap? It cannot leap it as electricity. It has to change its language entirely. It has to stop being a spark and become a substance. The nerve ending, when the signal arrives, spits out a puff of a particular chemical, a little cloud of molecules, and those molecules drift across the gap, across that impossibly narrow sea, and land on the far shore on the surface of the heart cell, where something is waiting to catch them. And it is what happens in that gap, that translation from electricity into chemistry and back again, the exact shape of the key and the exact shape of the lock it fits, that finally actually physically slows your heart. That is where we are going next, down into the gap, to watch a single molecule arrive. So let us go there. Let us shrink ourselves down, smaller than a dust mote, smaller than a speck of pollen, until the surface of that one heart cell rises up in front of us like a vast rolling plain. It is not smooth. Up close, nothing ever is. It is a landscape crowded with little structures, bumps and pits and tangled machinery, and studded across this plain, here and there, are peculiar objects that look almost like tiny gatehouses. Each one is a single molecule, but a big folded one, a protein, threaded through the wall of the cell so that part of it sticks out into the gap and part of it hangs down inside. This is the lock. The scientists gave it a plain and unlovely name. They call it the M2 muscarinic receptor. You do not need to love the name. You only need to picture the gatehouse, sitting there, patient, its door on the outside shaped in a very particular way, waiting for exactly one kind of visitor and no other. And here comes the visitor. The little cloud of molecules the nerve puffed out is drifting across, and one of them, just one, wanders close. It is a small thing called acetylcholine. Say it slowly and it stops sounding frightening. Acetylcholine. It is the chemical word your nervous system uses over and over all through your body whenever it wants to whisper a command across one of these gaps. And this particular molecule of it, tumbling and drifting, happens to fit the outer door of the gatehouse. Not approximately. Exactly. The way a key fits a lock is not that it is roughly the right size. It is that every bump on the key matches a hollow in the lock, and every hollow on the key matches a bump, so the two of them nestle together and hold. That is what chemistry is, really. It is shape meeting shape in the dark. The acetylcholine settles into the outer face of the M2 receptor, and the two shapes clasp, and in that instant of clasping, the whole big folded protein feels it. It shifts. It changes its posture, the way you might straighten up when someone taps you on the shoulder. The tap on the outside has become a movement on the inside. The message has crossed the wall without anything crossing the wall. Nothing passed through. A shape on one side simply rearranged a shape on the other. Now watch what that inner movement sets loose, because this is the loveliest little relay in the whole story. Hanging on the inside face of that gatehouse, tucked up against it, is another molecule, a messenger that has been waiting there, coiled and ready. When the receptor shifts, it lets this messenger go, and the messenger breaks into pieces, and one of those pieces, a small fragment, goes skating away along the inner wall of the cell. It does not go far. It does not carry a document. It is more like a runner sprinting to the next station with a single word to deliver, and the station it runs to is another gatehouse of a different kind. A channel, a genuine pore, a hole through the wall of the cell that can be open or shut like a little door with a spring on it. That door, at rest, is closed. The runner arrives, touches it, and the door swings open. The people who study these things gave that door a name too, a real mouthful, a string of letters. Let us not carry the whole string, let us just call it the potassium door, because the thing that pours through it, once it is open, is potassium. Now I have to tell you a little secret about the inside of every living cell, because without it none of this makes sense. Your cells keep themselves stuffed full of potassium. They pump it in and hoard it, so that inside the cell there is a great crowd of potassium, and outside there is comparatively little. Potassium likes to be spread out evenly, the way a crowd packed into one room will surge for the exits the moment you open a door. So the instant that potassium door swings open, potassium rushes out. It streams through the pore, out of the crowded inside into the roomier outside, and it takes something with it as it goes. It carries electric charge. Each little potassium is a carrier of one small positive charge, and as they flood outward, they carry positive charge out of the cell with them. And that at last is the physical act. That is the hand on the brake, because a heart cell, a pacemaker cell, the little conductor cell that sets the rhythm, does its work by slowly building up its own electricity, creeping upward toward a threshold, and when it reaches the top it fires, and that firing is a heartbeat. It is like a slow drip filling a bucket until the bucket tips. Drip, 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 tip. That is your pulse. But now potassium is streaming out, carrying positive charge away, and that makes the inside of the cell more negative. It drags the cell back down, away from the tipping point. It is as if, while the bucket is filling, someone quietly opened a drain in the bottom. Now the water climbs more slowly. Now it takes longer to reach the lip and tip over. The drips have not changed. The bucket has not changed. But the tipping comes later, and the space between one beat and the next stretches out. Just a little, just enough. Your heart slows. Not because anything shoved it, not because anything grabbed it, but because a door was opened and a crowd of charged particles walked out and left the inside of one cell a shade more negative than it was a heartbeat ago. I want you to sit for a moment with how strange and how gentle that whole chain is. A wandering nerve carries a spark down from the base of your skull. The spark cannot cross the last gap, so it turns into a puff of chemical. The chemical drifts across and fits a lock by its shape alone. The lock shifts and lets go of a messenger. The messenger runs and opens a door. Potassium pours out of the door. And the pouring of potassium is what lengthens the pause between your heartbeats. Every single link in that chain is doing nothing more than the simplest thing it can do. Shapes fitting shapes. crowds flowing from where they are packed to where they are sparse. There is no intelligence anywhere in the chain, no little manager reading a plan. It is all just physics and geometry, one plane step after another, and the sum of those plane steps is that your heart eases off. Here is a detail that ought to surprise you, and it surprised the people who first measured it. That potassium door I described, the one the runner opens, is not built out of a single piece. It is assembled from several protein parts fitted together, like staves making a barrel, and among those parts is one particular kind that the scientists have found you simply cannot do without. They gave it, again, a homely little tag, a name like Gurk 4, and I will not dress it up. But its importance is astonishing. When researchers looked carefully at how much of the heart's slowing, the whole slowing produced by that wandering nerve, could be traced to this one component of the door, the answer came back at roughly half of the break. One single kind of protein part, one stave in the barrel, and take it away and you lose about half of the entire effect of the nerve on the heart. Think about that. The next time your exhale eases your pulse, understand that a good share of that easing runs through a single flavor of molecular gatehouse, repeated over and over across the cells of your heart. Nature did not spread the responsibility around evenly. It leaned hard on one small thing. Now, you might be forming a picture in your head of all this happening instantly. The nerve firing and the heart slowing in the very same breath, quick as flipping a switch. And it is quick by the standards of a life. But it is not instant, and the exact size of the delay turns out to matter enormously, more than you would guess, and it is going to become the hinge of everything that follows. Because there are really two speeds in your nervous system, and this slow chemical relay I just walked you through is the slow one. When one nerve wants to shout to another nerve in a hurry, it uses a faster trick, a different kind of door that the chemical opens directly, and that shouting happens in a flash, in a fraction of a thousandth of a second. But the whisper to the heart, this one, the M2 and the messenger and the potassium door, this one takes its time. From the moment the nerve fires to the moment the potassium actually starts to flow, there is a lag. Not long by a clock on the wall, something like 1/10 to 15/100ths of a second, a blink. But your heart lives its whole life in blinks. A single beat is less than a second. So a delay of 1/10 of a second is not nothing to the heart. It is a real slice of a heartbeat. It means the brake does not land the instant the foot presses. It lands a moment later. And where in the rhythm of the beat that moment falls, whether it arrives early in the cycle or late, decides whether it slows this beat or has to wait and slow the next one instead. And that small truth, that the brake arrives late and its timing is everything, is the door into the next room. Let us walk through it and watch a single nerve pulse try to catch a single heartbeat and see what happens when it is early and what happens when it is late. Picture that nerve pulse as a runner sprinting down a long corridor with a message in his hand. And the corridor is the vagus, and the door at the end is the sinoatrial node, and behind that door a small clock is turning. The clock is the pacemaker cycle. It starts low, at its most negative, its most rested, and then it begins the slow climb, the gentle drift upward that engineers of the heart call diastolic depolarization. It creeps up, and when it reaches the threshold, the cell fires, the heart beats, and the clock resets to the bottom to begin again. That whole climb, in a resting person, takes something like a second, a little less. And into that climbing clock, the runner arrives with his message written in acetylcholine. Now here is where the timing becomes almost tender. If the runner arrives early in the climb, very early, say 50 to 70 milliseconds after the cell has reset and begun its ascent, his message lands with maximum effect on this very beat. The potassium doors open, the potassium pours out, the inside of the cell is dragged back down toward the negative, the climb is interrupted, the drift slows, and the moment of firing is pushed later. The beat is stretched. It is like tapping the shoulder of a man who has just begun walking up a hill. He has all the hill left to climb, so you slowing him now delays his arrival at the top by a good long while. That is where the brake bites deepest. But suppose the runner is late. Suppose the message does not arrive until 150, 170 milliseconds into the cycle. By then, the pacemaker cell may already be well up its hill, close to the threshold, committed, about to fire. And the brake, arriving with this little tenth of a second lag on top of that, simply cannot land in time to stop this beat. So it does not. This beat fires on schedule. The message is not wasted, mind you, it carries over. The potassium doors it opened are still open into the next cycle, and so the effect is postponed. It slows the following beat instead. The brake was pressed, but the car had already crossed the line, so the braking happens on the next lap. Sit with that for a moment, because it is one of the quiet miracles of how you are built. The very same nerve burst, the identical squirt of the identical molecule, can slow this heartbeat or the next one, depending on nothing more than the instant it happens to arrive. A few hundredths of a second of difference in timing, and the effect jumps from one beat to its neighbor. Your heart is not a dumb bucket that fills and spills. It is a rhythm being nudged by another rhythm, and when two rhythms meet, everything depends on the phase, on whether the nudge comes at the crest or the trough. And why is the message so brief, so sharply confined to a beat or two? Because the messenger is erased almost as fast as it is delivered. The acetylcholine that the vagus releases into the little gap at the node does not linger and pile up. There is an enzyme waiting there, acetylcholinesterase, whose entire job is to chop that molecule apart the instant its work is done. So a single vagal burst is not a sustained push. It is a tap. One tap, one message, chopped up, gone. Which is exactly why the heart can be steered breath by breath, why the slowing on your exhale is not a slow, lumbering thing that smears across 10 beats, but a crisp, beat-by-beat responsiveness. The eraser is as important as the pencil. Without the fast erasing, the whole system would blur, and you could not have this delicate beat-to-beat conversation between your lungs and your heart at all. Think of how different that is from the other kind of nerve signaling in your body, the fast kind, the nicotinic kind, where a nerve tells a muscle to twitch and the message crosses in something like 0.2 of a millisecond. That is 1,000 times faster than the muscarinic brake we are talking about at the heart. 0.2 of a millisecond, that is a nerve shouting into a muscle's ear, instant, sharp, done. The vagal brake on the heart is not built that way. It goes the slow route on purpose, through a floating messenger, through a receptor that does not open the channel itself, but has to send an inner runner of its own, the little glue piece, breaking loose inside the cell and drifting over to nudge the potassium door open. All of that indirection costs time, 100 milliseconds of it. And you might ask, why would nature build something so sluggish when it obviously knows how to build something fast? The answer, I think, is that the heart does not want a shout. A shout is for emergencies, for yanking your hand off a stove. The heart wants a dimmer switch, not a light switch. It wants something that can be turned gently, continuously, up a little and down a little, breath in and breath out, without slamming. The slowness is the gentleness. The indirection is the delicacy. By routing the signal through a chemical cascade with a built-in lag and a built-in eraser, the body gets a brake that is smooth, that is modulated, that can lean into the pedal by degrees. And smoothness is exactly what you want in the thing that has to beat, unbroken, softly, for every second of every day of your entire life. You would not want a heart rate that jerks. You want one that breathes. Now let us make this real, because so far the runner and the clock are just pictures in the dark. In the laboratory, people have measured this in the pacemaker cells of a rabbit, watching the potassium current itself, and the whole response, from the moment the messenger lands to the moment the current is flowing full, unfolds in under 2 seconds. Under 2 seconds for the machinery to swing fully open. But the leading edge of it, the first bite, is already there within that single beat, within that 100 to 150 milliseconds. So there are really 2 timescales braided together here. There is the fast edge that catches the very next beat, and there is the slower fill, over a second or two, that sets the deeper level of slowing if the vagus keeps talking. One is the tap, the other is the lean. And this braiding of 2 timescales is not a curiosity off to the side. It is the whole reason your breathing can move your heart the way it does. Because a breath is slow. A comfortable breath in and out takes several seconds. 10, 12 seconds if you stretch the exhale long the way we keep coming back to. That is far slower than a single beat. and comfortably within reach of that 1 to 2 second fill of the potassium machinery. So over the course of one long exhale, the vagus is not sending one lonely tap. It is sending burst after burst, tap after tap, and the slow-filling potassium response has time to build, to accumulate, to lean the pacemaker cell down and hold it down for the whole length of the outbreath. The heart slows and stays slow, gently, for those few long seconds while the air is leaving you. Then you breathe in, and the whole thing lifts. The bursts thin out, the taps stop coming, the eraser cleans up the last of the messenger, the potassium doors drift shut, the pacemaker cell is released, its climb steepens again, and the beats quicken. Up on the inhale, down on the exhale, and the depth of that rise and fall is set. Quietly. By all this timing we have been walking through. By how early or late the taps land. By how fast the eraser works. By how well the slow fill matches the slow rhythm of the breath. When those things line up, the oscillation is deep and strong. When they fight, it is shallow. You can feel, maybe, why the speed of your breathing should matter so enormously then, though we have not yet earned the full picture of it. If you breathe fast, in and out, 2 seconds a breath, you are trying to swing the heart faster than the potassium machinery can comfortably fill and empty. You press the brake and release it before the lean has even developed. The taps arrive, but the slow fill never catches up, and the rise and fall of the heart gets squashed, blunted, small. But if you breathe slowly, luxuriously, letting each exhale run long, you are moving at a pace the machinery loves. You give the slow fill time to build on every outbreath and time to drain on every inbreath. The swing grows deep. The heart's rise and fall becomes broad and unhurried, in beautiful step with the air moving through you. There is a number attached to this, a crossover point where the swing begins to collapse, and we will come to it. Because it was measured carefully a long time ago, and it tells us something almost startling about why the old advice to simply breathe slow is not folklore, but physics. But before we chase that number, I want you to hold on to the shape of what we have just seen, because it is the heart of the whole matter. A message that arrives with a lag, a messenger erased as fast as it is made, 2 braided timescales, one to catch a single beat, one to lean over many, and a breath, slow and long, sending its burst down the wandering nerve at just the right unhurried pace to let the slow machinery do its deepest work. Everything else we will build tonight rests on this. The break is late, the break is brief, and the break is smooth. Remember those 3 and let them settle, and we will go looking next for the surprising discovery that most of this is not even triggered by your lungs at all, but by something already ticking, quietly deep in the floor of your brain before a single breath of air has moved. So let us go looking for it. You would think, wouldn't you, that the whole business is simple plumbing. Air rushes in, the lungs swell like 2 wet paper bags, and somewhere in that stretching tissue are little sensors that feel the pull and shout up the nerve. The heart hears the shout and speeds along. Pull the air out, the bags go slack, the shouting stops, and the heart eases down again. It is a lovely picture. It has the great virtue of being the kind of thing you could draw on the back of an envelope for a friend, and they would nod, and you would both feel you understood the world a little better. And for a very long time, that is roughly the picture people carried in their heads. The lungs laid, the heart follows. The breath is the master and the pulse is the servant, and all the trembling of your heart rate is just an echo of your chest going up and down. I want to tell you that this picture is mostly wrong. Not entirely wrong. There is a grain of truth in it that we will rescue in a moment. But the main engine of the thing is not in your chest at all. It is upstream. It is already running before the air ever moves. And the way we know this is one of those quiet, clever experiments that I find genuinely delightful, because it takes the obvious story and pulls the rug out with a very gentle tug. Here is the difficulty you face if you want to test the simple picture. Ordinarily, when you breathe, 2 things happen together, married so tightly you cannot tell them apart. First, deep in the floor of your brain, a little cluster of cells that keeps the rhythm of breathing fires off its command, telling your diaphragm to pull down and your chest to open. Call that the drumbeat, the central order to breathe. Second, As a consequence of that order, your lungs actually inflate, and the tissue actually stretches, and those stretch sensors actually fire. The drum beat and the stretch always arrive at the same instant, because one causes the other. So how on earth would you ever know which of them is doing the work on your heart? They always show up to the party together, arm in arm. You cannot fire one without the other. Unless you find a way to pry them apart. And that is exactly what two researchers, Scatiotti and Elstad, managed to do in a study published in the year 2022, and I think it is worth slowing down over, because the trick of it is so pretty. They took a machine, a ventilator, a device that can push air into a person's lungs from the outside on a fixed schedule, tick, 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 like a bellows worked by a patient hand. So the lungs go on inflating and deflating on time. The stretch sensors go on firing faithfully, exactly as they would in normal breathing. The peripheral part of the story, the part in the chest, is kept fully alive and working. But then they did the other half. They arranged things so that the person's own central drive to breathe, that drum beat in the brainstem, was quieted, suppressed, turned down low. The machine is doing the breathing now, so the brain does not need to send its command, and it largely stops sending it. So look at what they have built. They have taken the marriage and separated the partners. The lungs are stretching, the sensors are shouting up the nerve, the whole peripheral machinery is intact and busy. But the central drummer has set down the sticks. Now, if the simple picture were right, if the heart's rhythm really came from the lungs, from the stretching, from the periphery, then nothing much should change. The stretch is still there. The heart should keep swinging up and down with each mechanical breath, just as before. The echo should still echo. But it does not. When they took away the central drive and left only the stretching lungs, the swing of the heart rate, that beautiful rise on the in-breath and fall on the out-breath, collapsed. It shrank by around 60%. More than half of it simply vanished. And out of 19 people they tested, only 3 held on to much of their rhythm at all. 16 of them lost the great bulk of it the moment the brain stopped drumming, even though their lungs never stopped moving. Sit with that a moment. The air was still going in and out. The tissue was still stretching. The senses were still firing. And still, most of the heart's music died away. The lungs, it turns out, were never really the conductor. They were more like a member of the orchestra who plays along, adds a little color, but was never the one keeping time. What was keeping time was the drummer. The central rhythm generator, that small society of cells deep in the medulla that decides all on its own when it is time to breathe in and when it is time to breathe out. It does not wait for the lungs to report back. It sends its command outward. And in the very same breath, so to speak, it reaches sideways and touches the cardiac machinery directly. It says to the heart, I am about to order an inhale, so ease off your brake, let the beat quicken. And then, I am about to order an exhale, so lean on the brake again, let the beat settle. The heart is being told what the breath is going to do before the breath does it. This is what we mean by a feed-forward system. Not the heart reacting to the lungs after the fact, but the same brainstem command splitting in two. One copy to the muscles of breathing, one copy to the wandering nerve and the heart, so that pulse and breath move as one because they were born from one order. I find this genuinely marvelous, and I want to be honest about why. It would have been so easy and so reasonable for nature to build the reactive version, the one on the back of the envelope. Stretch the lung, feel the stretch, adjust the heart. That is a perfectly sensible design. Plenty of the body works that way, on feedback, on measuring what has happened and correcting. But here nature chose the other, subtler path. It chose to anticipate. It wired the clock of breathing straight into the break of the heart, so that the two would be phase-locked from the source, not stitched together after the fact by a chain of senses. And when you build a thing that way, when you drive it from a central rhythm rather than from feedback, you get something feedback can never quite give you. You get exquisite timing. You get a heart that speeds and slows in perfect step with the breath, not a beat too late. Because it is not waiting for news to arrive. It already knows. Now I promised you a grain of truth to rescue, and here it is, because I do not want you to think the lungs count for nothing. That peripheral pathway, the one with the stretch sensors, is real, and it does its part. Those sensors have a proper name. The slowly adapting stretch receptors, sitting in the smooth muscle that wraps your airways, and when the lung inflates they do fire, and they do send their signal up the vagus nerve to a little relay station in the brainstem called the nucleus of the solitary tract. And from there the signal reaches over to those cardiac vagal cells and quiets them for a moment, which nudges the heart to speed. When the lung empties again, the sensors fall silent, the quieting is lifted, the vagal cells resume their steady firing, and the heart slows. This is a genuine reflex. It has a name too, an old one, the Herring-Breuer reflex, named long ago for the two men who first described how the lungs own stretch guards against overinflation. So the lungs are not silent. They add their voice. In our experiment, they were the 3 out of 19 who still had something to say, and the small residue of rhythm that survived when the drummer went quiet. But they are the accompaniment, not the melody. Take away the central drive and you take away most of the song, and no amount of faithful stretching in the chest can put it back. So here is where we have arrived, and I want you to hold it the way you held the last thing, gently, without gripping. The rise and fall of your heart with your breath is not an echo of your lungs. It is a command issued from the deep floor of your brain, a single order that forks, one branch to the muscles that move the air, one branch down the wandering nerve to the brake on your heart, so that the two are married at the source and move together in anticipation, not reaction. Your lungs join in. They are not nothing. But the conductor stands in the brainstem, and the conductor was already conducting before you drew a breath. And this changes rather beautifully what it means when you choose to breathe slowly and let your exhale run long. You are not merely stretching and unstretching 2 bags of air and hoping the heart notices. You are reaching down and taking the drumsticks yourself. You are setting the tempo of that central rhythm by hand, saying to the drummer, here, beat like this, slow, unhurried, a long soft fall on every out-breath. And because the drummer is wired straight to the break, every slow beat you ask for is a slow, deliberate press on the vagal brake of your heart, delivered on time, in phase, exactly when it does the most good. You are not persuading your heart from the outside. You are conducting it from within at its own source. Which raises the next question, the one I think has been waiting patiently in the back of the room this whole while. If the tempo is what matters, is there a particular tempo, one special magical rate, at which this whole coupled system of heart and vessels and breath falls into its deepest and most willing swing? There is, and it is a number, a real and specific number, and the reason it exists at all is a story about resonance, about pushing a child on a swing, and it is where we are going next. Think about a child on a swing. It is one of the first machines any of us ever learn to operate, and we learn it in the body, long before anybody explains a thing. You do not shove the swing harder to make it go higher. If you shove at the wrong moment, you get nothing, or worse, you kill the motion, the chains buckle, the child lurches. What you learn without words is timing. You give a small push at exactly the moment the swing has finished falling back and is just beginning to go forward again. A tiny nudge, delivered on the beat, and the arc grows. Another tiny nudge on the next beat, and it grows again. The pushes are gentle. They are almost nothing. But because they arrive in step with the swing's own natural rhythm, they add up. That adding up is the whole secret. That is resonance, and it is one of the deepest and most useful ideas in all of physics. Every swinging thing has a rate it likes. A long swing sways slowly. A short one goes quickly. A heavy pendulum in a grandfather clock keeps its own stubborn time no matter how you coax it. Push a swinging system at its favorite rate, the rate it would choose on its own, and even the smallest pushes pile up into an enormous swing. Push it at the wrong rate, some rate it does not care for, and your pushes fight each other, one helping while the next one hinders, and the whole thing stays small and sullen. So the question I left you holding is really this. Does your heart, tangled up as it is with your blood vessels and your breath, have a favorite rate? A swing rate of its own? A tempo at which the little pushes of your breathing pile up into the biggest, deepest, most willing swing of your pulse? It does. And to see why, I have to introduce you to yet another loop of control running quietly inside you. a loop we have brushed against but not yet looked at squarely. It is called the baroreflex, and it is your body's blood pressure thermostat. Scattered in the walls of your big arteries, up in the arch of the aorta where the blood first leaves the heart, and in the carotid arteries running up either side of your neck, there are little stretch sensors. When your blood pressure rises, those arteries balloon out a touch, and the sensors feel the stretch and fire faster. That firing runs back to the brainstem and says, "Pressure is high, ease off," and the brainstem presses the vagal brake, and the heart slows and pressure comes back down. When pressure falls, the sensors go quiet, the brake releases, the heart speeds, and pressure climbs again. It is a thermostat. It is always working. It is always chasing. Here is the thing about any thermostat, any control loop that senses and corrects, senses and corrects. It never corrects instantly. There is always a lag. The pressure sensor feels the change, the signal travels, the brainstem responds, the acetylcholine lands, the heart adjusts, the blood redistributes. All of that takes time, and a control loop with a built-in delay does not settle down to a dead flat line. It overshoots, then undershoots, then overshoots a little less, and it hunts, it oscillates, it rings like a struck bell. The baroreflex, all by itself, has a natural ringing rate. And that natural ringing rate in the human cardiovascular system comes out to somewhere right around one swing every 10 seconds, which is to say about 1/10 of a cycle each second. The physicists would write that as roughly 0.1 in units they call hertz, meaning 1/10 of an oscillation per second. Never mind the name. Hold the picture. Your blood pressure, left to its own devices, likes to gently rise and fall about once every 10 seconds. Now count. If your pressure system wants to swing once every 10 seconds, and you want to push it in step, on the beat, like the parent behind the swing, how often should you push? Once every 10 seconds. And what happens once every 10 seconds that shoves on your whole cardiovascular system? A breath. One full breath in and out every 10 seconds is 6 breaths in a minute. And there it is. There is the magic number, and it is not magic at all, it is just resonance. The same resonance as the swing, the same as a wine glass singing when you rub its rim, the same as a bridge that must never be marched across in step. Breathe about 5 or 6 times a minute, and each breath's push lands exactly in phase with the blood pressure swing your body already wanted to make. The pushes pile up. The swing of your heart rate grows huge, far bigger than any single breath could ever produce on its own. Physiologists have a name for this favorite rate. They call it your resonance frequency. And here is a lovely human wrinkle. It is not precisely the same number for every person. When you measure carefully, each individual has their own resonance rate, and across people it ranges from about 4.5 breaths per minute at the slow end up to about 7 at the quick end. The most common value, the one that sits right in the fat middle of the crowd, is about 5.5 breaths per minute. So there is no single sacred rate handed down for all of humanity. There is a narrow, comfortable band, and each body has its own preferred spot inside it, the way each swing in the playground has its own length and its own tempo. But nearly everyone lands somewhere near 5 or 6 breaths a minute, and that is why every slow breathing practice worth its salt, from a dozen different traditions that never spoke to one another, converges on almost exactly that pace. They were all, without knowing the physics, feeling for the same resonance. Now I want to show you the other edge of this, because the other edge is where the whole thing snaps into focus, and it comes from a beautiful piece of work published back in 1981, a landmark study in the American Journal of Physiology led by a man named Ekberg. He asked the simplest possible follow-up question. If slow breathing gives you a big swing in heart rate, what happens as you speed the breathing up? Not just a little. He mapped it out across a whole range of rates, and what he found has a wonderful clean shape to it. Below a certain rate, the swing of your heart rate with each breath is generous and full. But there is a corner, a turning point, sitting at around 7 breaths per minute, give or take a breath and a half either way. And above that corner, as you breathe faster and faster, the swing in your heart rate shrinks, and it shrinks steadily a straight and remorseless decline. The faster you breathe, the smaller the swing, all the way down. Sit with what that means, because it is the quiet punchline of this whole stretch of the talk. When you are anxious, when you are frightened, when you are running from something real or something imagined, what does your breathing do? It goes fast. Short, shallow, quick breaths, high up in the chest, maybe 20 or 30 a minute. And at that rate, you are far, far above the corner. You are breathing so fast that the beautiful swing of your heart rate is squashed almost flat. The vagal brake barely gets a chance to press before the next inhale yanks it off again. Your body, in its panic, has tuned itself to precisely the wrong rate, the rate where the pushes fight each other, where nothing piles up, where the swing stays small and jittery and tense. Fast breathing does not merely fail to calm you, it actively blunts the very mechanism that would. And slow breathing, dropping down to 5 or 6, is not some mystical act. It is you reaching out and grabbing the swing and matching your push to its natural fall. It is you climbing down off the wrong rate and settling onto the right one. Everything we have built so far, the drummer in the brainstem, the wandering nerve, the chemical key opening the potassium door, the 100-millisecond delay that still lands within a single beat, all of it was leading here to a single tuning knob you can turn with nothing but the muscles of your own chest and belly. You cannot consciously order a single heartbeat to slow, but you can choose the tempo of your breath. And by choosing that tempo, you set the rate of the pushes, and by matching the pushes to the swing your body already wanted to make, you let the whole coupled system, heart and vessels and breath, fall into its deepest and most willing oscillation. But I have been a little too tidy just now, and I owe you the truth, which is messier and more interesting. Because if resonance were the whole story, if all that mattered were breathing at 5 or 6 a minute, then the length of the inhale versus the length of the exhale would not matter at all. A slow, even breath, in for 5, out for 5, would do just as well as a long, trailing exhale. And the title of this whole talk, the promise that breathing out for twice as long as you breathe in is the thing that matters, would be a little bit of a lie. So which is it? Is it the tempo that counts? The raw rate, 6 breaths a minute no matter how you slice each one? Or is it the shape of the breath, the long, slow fall of the exhale that does the real work on your heart? Two careful groups of scientists asked exactly that question, ran exactly that experiment, and came back holding two different answers. And that argument, that genuine and unresolved argument between good studies that disagree, is the next room we walk into. Let me take you into that room slowly, because it is one of my favorite kinds of rooms. It is the room where two honest experiments disagree, and nobody is lying and nobody is stupid, and the disagreement itself is the thing that teaches you. The first group, working around the year 2021, gathered 28 people and did something rather clever. Instead of forcing everyone to breathe at some fixed drum beat, they let each person settle into their own natural rate, whatever felt easy and unforced. Their own private tempo. And then, holding that tempo fixed, they changed only one thing. They changed the shape. First, they had people breathe evenly, in for as long as out, a nice symmetric breath, 1 to 1. Then they had people stretch the exhale to twice the inhale, 2 parts out for every 1 part in. Same rate. Same number of breaths in a minute, only the proportion changed, the balance between the going up and the coming down. And they measured. They looked at the beat-to-beat wobble of the heart, that fingerprint of vagal traffic we have been circling all night, the numbers the physiologists call by their initials, the root mean square of the successive differences, and the high-frequency band of the heart's variability. Both of those are, roughly speaking, ways of listening to how loudly the wandering nerve is whispering to the pacemaker. And with the long exhale, the 2 to 1 exhale, both of those numbers went up. Meaningfully up. The vagal whisper got louder, and here is the part I find rather beautiful. When the people stopped, when they quit the exercise entirely and just sat there breathing however they liked, the elevated calm did not vanish in an instant. It lingered. For something like 4 minutes afterward, the parasympathetic tone stayed lifted, like a room that holds its warmth for a while after you turn off the stove. So that group came back and said, plainly, the shape matters. The long exhale does something the even breath does not. Now, if that were the end of it, we could all go to sleep satisfied. But science is not so tidy, and a good thing too, or there would be nothing left to do. Because a second group, working a few years later, around 2024, ran what looks at first like the very same experiment and got what looks like the opposite answer. They too compared an even breath against a long exhale breath. They too watched the heart's variability, all those same measures, the root mean square differences, the standard deviation of the intervals, the fraction of beats that differ by more than a whisker, and the plain old heart rate itself. Two separate studies they ran, one with 26 people and one with 16, and they found no difference, none that they could call real. Whether you breathed evenly or stretched your exhale to double, the heart's variability came out the same. So now you must be thinking, one of them is wrong. Somebody made a mistake. But no, look closer, because the whole lesson is hiding in one small difference between how the two groups set up their experiments, and it is the difference between a fair fight and a rigged one. Remember, the first group let each person breathe at their own natural rate, and that natural rate was, for many people, a little quicker than the magic slow tempo. The second group did something stricter. They pinned everyone in every condition to exactly 6 breaths a minute. They marched everybody down to that resonance frequency first, that slow, deep tuning fork tempo where the whole cardiovascular system rings like a struck bell, and only then did they compare even breathing against long exhale breathing. And do you see what that does? Once you have already dragged the system down to its resonance, down to where the baroreflex loop is swinging at its very fullest, you have already collected almost all the prize. You have opened the throttle all the way. At that point, whether you spend a little more of your 12 seconds going up or coming down is fussing with the last few pennies after you have already won the fortune. The tempo did the heavy lifting, the shape had almost nothing left to add. But the first group never went that slow. Their people were breathing at their own comfortable, somewhat brisker pace, up in a range where the system is not yet ringing at full volume. And up there, where you have not yet claimed the big prize, the shape of the breath still has room to help. Stretching the exhale buys you something real, because you have not already maxed out the underlying resonance. So both groups told the truth. The shape matters when you are not already at resonance. And the shape stops mattering, or nearly so, once you have slowed all the way down to that special tempo where the system sings on its own. It is not a contradiction. It is a map with two regions, and each group was standing in a different region, describing exactly what they saw. I want you to sit with that for a moment, in the dark, because it is a small masterpiece of how nature actually answers our questions. We so badly want a single clean rule. Long exhale good, even breath less good, end of story. And nature says, well, it depends where you are standing. It depends how slow you already are. The rule is real, but it is conditional, and the condition is the very thing, the breathing rate, that the two experiments happen to handle differently. Most of the arguments you will ever hear between careful people are like this. Not one right and one wrong, but two truths sitting in two different rooms, each mistaking their room for the whole house. And notice what this does to the promise in the very title of this talk. Breathe out twice as long as you breathe in. Is that a magic ratio, a sacred 2-to-1? No. It is a wonderfully practical trick, and here is why it works even though the ratio itself is not sacred. If I simply tell you to stretch your exhale to twice your inhale without a single stopwatch, without any talk of resonance frequencies, what happens to you almost automatically? Your whole breath slows down. You cannot make the exhale long and luxurious without dragging the entire cycle out with it. The long exhale is a side door into slow breathing. You reach for the shape, and the tempo comes along for free, whether you meant it to or not. The ratio is the instruction. The slowing is the payoff. And the slowing is what quietly walks you down toward that resonance where the whole system starts to ring. So the 2-to-1 exhale is a piece of folk wisdom that works for a reason its own tellers may not fully know. It is a handle you can grab in the dark with no equipment, no counting past 8, and it delivers you gently to the slow tempo that does the real work. That is why it survives. Good tricks survive not because their explanation is correct, but because their result is reliable, and this one is reliable precisely because you cannot do it wrong. Reach for the long exhale, and you get the slowdown thrown in. Now let me carry you a step further, into a study I love, because it refused to give the tidy answer everyone expected. Around 2023, a group of researchers gathered 111 volunteers and ran a proper month-long contest between 4 different ways of breathing and being. One group practiced a thing called cyclic sighing, which is a double inhale through the nose to fully inflate the lungs, a top-up breath stacked on top of the first, and then a long, slow, complete exhale out through the mouth. A great emphasis on the emptying. Another group did box breathing, that even square-shaped breath, equal in, equal hold, equal out, equal hold. A third group did a fast, forceful, deliberately stirring style of breathing. And the fourth group did not fuss with the breath at all, they simply sat in quiet mindfulness meditation. Each group practiced only 5 minutes a day, which is nothing, a single song, and they kept at it for 1 month. And when the month was over and the measurements came in, the extended exhale group, the cyclic sighers, came out ahead on the thing you might care about most on a night like this. Their mood lifted the most, day over day. The biggest gain in positive feeling of all 4 groups, a little more even than the meditators, who did very well themselves. And there was one more result that belongs to the exhale group alone. They were the only group whose resting breathing rate actually came down over the month. They had, without trying, taught their own bodies to breathe a little slower all day long, even when they were not practicing. The exercise had left a mark. It had rewired the baseline. But here is the surprise, the one that keeps this from being a simple advertisement for slow breathing, and I want to set it down carefully before we open it up, because it is the very hinge between the fast beat-to-beat magic we have been marveling at and the slow, stubborn thing your heart does when you are not paying attention at all. And the surprise is this. Over that whole month, in every single one of those 4 groups, the resting heart rate, the plain number of beats per minute you would get sitting quietly, did not budge in any way you could trust. Not for the box breathers, not for the hyperventilators, not for the meditators, and not, mark this, for the cyclic sighers, the very people whose mood soared and whose breathing slowed. Their calm, steady, chronic heart rate stayed just about where it started. Now sit with that for a moment, in the dark, because it looks at first like a contradiction, and a contradiction is a gift. It means 2 things you thought were the same thing are secretly 2 different animals wearing the same coat. Here is the coat. When people say breathing slows your heart, they blur together 2 effects that live on completely different clocks. One of them is fast. It is the thing we have spent this whole night admiring. The beat-to-beat dip on every exhale, the little slackening of the rope that happens inside a single breath, the wave that rises when you draw air in and falls when you let it go. That effect is enormous and it is immediate. It happens in seconds. You can feel it tonight, this minute, and it will vanish the instant you stop paying attention to your breath. It is a live performance, not a recording. The other effect is slow. It is your baseline, your set point, the number your heart settles to when nobody is watching and nobody is breathing on purpose. That number is carved by months and years, by how fit you are, by your age, by the long weather of your life. And a month of 5 minutes a day, it turns out, is not enough to recarve it. The stone is harder than that. So the title of tonight, the promise that a certain way of breathing drops your heart rate in 60 seconds, is true and false at the same time. And the truth of it depends entirely on which heart rate you mean. If you mean the live one, the instantaneous rate between this beat and the next, then yes, absolutely, gloriously yes. Breathe out slow and long right now, and the interval between your beats will stretch within a breath or 2. You are watching it happen even as I say this. But if you mean the engraved one, the resting number on a doctor's chart, then no. A single minute does nothing lasting, and even a month of gentle practice may leave it almost exactly where it was. The 60-second drop is real. It is just a drop in the water level of a fast tide, not a lowering of the sea floor. And I find that distinction beautiful rather than disappointing, because it tells you something true about how the body is built. The body keeps its slow numbers slow on purpose. Imagine if every deep breath permanently reset your resting pulse. Imagine if one frightened gasp on a dark stair rewired your baseline for a week. You would be at the mercy of every passing gust. Instead, nature gives you a fast knob and a slow knob, and it keeps them apart. The fast knob, the vagal brake we have been turning all night, lets you respond to this exact moment, this breath, this small choice to exhale a little longer. The slow knob changes only when you give it months of a new habit, or years of a new fitness, or when illness or age turn it against your will. The wisdom is in the separation. You get to steer moment by moment without accidentally steering your whole life with every sigh. But do not let the slow knob stubbornness fool you into thinking the fast knob does not matter. It matters enormously, and here is why. Every one of those long exhales, every dip in the wave, is a small dose of something. It is a few seconds spent in a calmer chemistry, a few seconds of the brake pressed gently, a few seconds where acetylcholine is landing on those little gates in your pacemaker and the interval between beats is stretching out. And the studies hint, though they do not shout, that these doses may accumulate in ways that have nothing to do with your resting pulse. Remember the cyclic sires whose breathing rate came down all day. That is a slow change that grew out of many fast moments. The performance, repeated enough, quietly edited the recording. Not the heart rate, no, but the breath rate and the mood, and perhaps the way the whole nervous system holds itself between crises. The fast thing and the slow thing are separate, yes, but they are not strangers. They talk. They just talk slowly. Now let me pull on a thread I laid down earlier and left dangling, because it deserves to be followed all the way, and a night like this is exactly long enough to follow it. I told you about a quarrel between two careful studies. One group, Bay and colleagues, found that stretching the exhale to twice the inhale gave you more of the good stuff, more of that beat-to-beat variability that signals a well-tended vagal brake, than breathing in and out for equal times. The other group, Meehan and Schaffer, ran their own careful trial, held everyone at the same 6 breaths a minute, and found that the ratio made no difference at all. Equal breathing and long exhale breathing came out the same, and I promised we would not rush to declare a winner, because in a genuine disagreement between honest experiments there is usually a third thing hiding, a thing neither side put on the table, and finding it is worth more than picking a side. So what is the hidden thing here? Look closely at what was held fixed and what was allowed to vary. In the study that found the ratio mattered, people breathed at their own natural pace, whatever that happened to be, and only the ratio was changed. In the study that found the ratio did not matter, everyone was clamped to exactly 6 breaths a minute. That magic slow rate, that resonance we spent so long inside earlier. And there, at 6 breaths a minute, whether you spent your time as 4 seconds in and 8 out, or 6 and 6, the heart's variability came out about the same. Do you see what that suggests? It suggests that once you are already breathing slowly enough, once you have brought the whole cycle down to that resonant tempo where the blood pressure wave and the heart rate wave swing together in perfect step, the pace has already given you almost everything there is to give. The ratio, the exact split between breathing in and breathing out, is a second-order detail. It is the fine-tuning after the coarse tuning has done the real work. And that reframes the whole night, doesn't it? We started with the ratio. 2 to 1, exhale twice as long as you inhale. That was the promise in the title. That was the hook that brought you here. But the deeper physics, the thing the arguing studies point at when you make them stop shouting and speak plainly, is that the ratio is a servant, not a king. The king is the tempo. The king is slowness itself. Breathe slowly enough and you fall into resonance, and in resonance the system rings like a struck bell and the heart rate swings wide on every cycle, almost regardless of how you divide that cycle up. The long exhale is one very good way, maybe the easiest way, to get yourself down to that slow tempo, because a long exhale naturally drags the whole breath out and makes each cycle take longer. But it is the length of the whole breath, more than the lopsidedness of it, that does the heavy lifting. Why, then, does the long exhale still feel special? Why did the cyclic sires win on mood? And why do so many careful people swear by breathing out longer than they breathe in? I think there are a few honest answers, and I want to give them to you gently, without overselling any of them. The first is simply that a long exhale is a reliable way to slow down. If I told you only to breathe slowly, you might still snatch a quick breath in and a quick breath out with long empty pauses and lose the smooth resonant swing. But if I tell you to breathe out slowly, really let the exhale drain out to the end, you almost cannot help arriving at that gentle tempo. The instruction to lengthen the exhale is a kind of trick that lands you in the right place without your having to think about the tempo at all. The second answer is about the exhale itself, apart from tempo, and it reaches back to the machinery we opened up earlier in the night. Recall how the brake works. Recall that during the drawing in of breath, the cardiac vagal neurons in that little cluster at the back of your skull are held down, silenced, inhibited, and the heart is allowed to run a touch faster. And recall that on the letting go of breath, those same neurons are released, they fire again, acetylcholine spills onto the pacemaker, the little potassium gates swing open, the cell drifts to a more negative charge, and the next beat is politely delayed. The exhale is the phase of the breath when the brake is actually pressed. So if you spend more of your breathing cycle exhaling, you spend more of it in the press brake phase, more of it drifting toward the slow side of the wave. Over many cycles that could tilt the average, could keep you a little longer, a little more often, in that acetylcholine-soaked, unhurried chemistry. It is a modest tilt. But modest tilts, repeated with every breath for minutes, add up to a mood that lifts and a body that unclenches. The third answer is the one I trust least and mention only for honesty, because a good teacher owns his uncertainty. It may be partly a story we tell ourselves. The long, slow exhale is the breath of relief, the breath of the sigh, the breath you let out when the danger has passed and your shoulders finally come down. We have made that shape of breath all our lives, at the exact moments we felt safe. So when we make it on purpose, some old association may whisper safety back to us, and the feeling of calm arrives partly by suggestion, riding in on a lifetime of learned meaning. I cannot measure that whisper. The instruments do not catch it cleanly, but I will not pretend it is nothing. Because you are a creature of meaning as much as of chemistry, and the two are not so easily pulled apart when it comes to something as intimate as your own breath in the dark. So let me take that whisper and set it gently to one side and go back to the things the instruments do catch, because there is plenty there, and it is solid, and it does not depend on any story you tell yourself. Let me tell you about a room where 48 people sat down, one after another, and breathed on a schedule and let a machine watch their hearts. The average age in that room was young, a little under 27 years. And the schedule was simple enough that you could do it right now, lying where you are. In through the nose for 4 seconds. A little pause, a hold, for 2 seconds. Then out through the mouth for 4 seconds. 6 breaths a minute, more or less, for 5 minutes. That is all. No mantra, no incense, no special chair, just that shape of breathing held for 5 quiet minutes. And before they started, the machine read their hearts, and the average was 78.6 beats a minute, which is a perfectly ordinary resting pulse for a healthy young person sitting in a lab, a little bit up, maybe, from the small nerves of being measured. Then they breathed, and when the 5 minutes were done, the machine read again, and the average had fallen to 69.8 beats a minute. Work that out, and it is a drop of almost 9 beats a minute. 8.8, to put the number on it. 9 fewer thumps in every minute, from nothing but the deliberate shape of the air going in and coming out. Now I want you to feel how large that is, and also how modest both at once, because a good measurement always has 2 faces. 9 beats a minute is a real honest change. You would feel it in your chest if you were paying attention. It is the difference between a heart that is bracing and a heart that has been given permission to slow. And yet it is not a miracle, and it does not last forever, and here is the part I love, because it keeps us honest. They kept watching. 5 minutes after the breathing stopped, when the people had gone back to breathing however they pleased, the machine looked once more, and the pulse had crept back up to 72.4 beats a minute, not all the way back to where it started, but part way. The slowing was leaking away, the way warmth leaks out of a room when you stop feeding the fire. And this is exactly what everything we have built together would predict. Remember the little break, the acetylcholine landing on its receptor, the potassium door swinging open, the hyperpolarizing sigh of the pacemaker cell? Remember how fast that molecule is chewed up and swept away by the enzyme waiting there for it. The brake is only pressed while the foot is on it. Stop the slow breathing, and the pattern of vagal bursts drifts back toward its ordinary rhythm, and the heart drifts back up with it. What you are buying in those 5 minutes is not a permanent gift. It is a state, a weather. You can return to it any time you like, but you cannot bottle it and put it on a shelf. There was a second thing that machine measured in that same room, and it is worth a few quiet minutes of your attention, because it tells you the slowing was not happening in isolation. It measured the pressure of the blood in the arteries. And there are two numbers there. There is the higher one, the push at the peak, when the heart squeezes, which they call systolic. And there is the lower one, the resting push between beats, which they call diastolic. Before the breathing, the higher number averaged about 119. Say it fully, 118.9 in the units they use, millimeters of mercury, which is just an old and stubborn way of measuring a push by how high it would shove a column of that heavy silver liquid. After the 5 minutes, that higher number had come down to about 113, a drop of nearly 6, and the lower number came down too, from about 76 to about 73, a drop of 3.5. So the pressure eased at the same time the rate eased, and I do not want you to hear that as two separate coincidences. They are two faces of one thing. When the vagal brake presses harder, the heart does not only beat slower, it beats a little gentler, and the whole arterial tree relaxes its grip by a hair. The people who did that study reached for the same machinery we have been assembling all evening to explain it. Enhanced parasympathetic activity, they said. Augmented cardiovagal reflexes. Increased sensitivity of the baroreflex, that pressure-sensing loop we spent so long inside. And reduced output from the other branch, the sympathetic, the accelerator, the branch that shouts run. Turn the brake up and the accelerator down, and both the rate and the pressure sink together like a tide going out along the whole coast at once. Now I owe you a confession about the number in the title of this talk. The 60 seconds, the 1 minute, because a careful person ought to look a claim in the eye. That study I just told you about ran for 5 minutes, not 1. And the study before it ran for 5 minutes too. And you might feel a little cheated thinking, you promised me 1 minute and you keep handing me 5. But here is the honest and rather beautiful truth. The slowing does not wait for the 5th minute to begin. It begins on the very first long exhale. The moment you stretch the breath out, the pattern of vagal firing shifts, and within a beat or two your heart begins to sag downward on the out-breath more than it climbs on the in-breath. Inside a single minute of slow breathing, you will already have felt the drift begin, already have caught your own pulse leaning down. What the extra minutes buy you is not the start of the effect. They buy you depth and steadiness, and a state that has had time to settle in and hold. 1 minute opens the door. 5 minutes lets you walk into the room and sit down, and there is a lovely piece of evidence that the state, once entered, does not vanish the instant you stop. In one of the studies we have already met, the one that compared the long exhale against the even breath, when the people stopped their 2-to-1 breathing, the raised vagal tone did not drop off a cliff. It lingered. For roughly 4 minutes afterward, the markers of that parasympathetic calm stayed elevated, coasting, the way a heavy swing keeps arcing for a while after you stop pushing it. So the picture is not a light switch, on and then instantly off. It is more like warming a stone by the fire. You put the warmth in over minutes, and it holds the warmth and gives it back slowly for minutes more after you carry it away. I find something deeply reassuring in that, and I want to sit with it before we go on. It means the practice is forgiving. You do not have to hold the perfect rhythm without a single lapse to get the reward. You lean the breath long, you let the heart begin its slow sag, you keep it up for a few minutes if you can, and then even when your attention wanders off, as attention always does, especially in the dark, especially when you are tired, the calm you built does not evaporate. It coasts. It keeps you company for a while on its own. The body is not waiting to punish your imperfection. It is quietly on your side. Let me pull one more thread out of all this, because I have been circling it, and I do not want to leave it unspoken. We keep finding two different quantities getting tangled together, and the confusion between them is at the root of half the loose talk you will ever hear about breathing and the heart. There is the beat-to-beat wobble, the rise on the inhale and the fall on the exhale, the thing that swells when you breathe slow. That is one quantity, and it is the star of our whole story. And then there is the plain average, the resting rate, the number of beats over a long stretch when you are not doing anything special at all. That is a different quantity, and the two do not have to move together. The clearest demonstration of that came from that month-long study, the one with 111 people practicing 5 minutes a day. Their moods lifted, their resting breathing slowed, the extended exhale group came out ahead. But the resting heart rate, the plain long-run average, did not budge in any of the 4 groups over the whole month, not significantly. And that is not a failure of the breathing. It is a signpost pointing at exactly what breathing does and does not touch. The slow exhale is a magnificent lever on the moment-to-moment behavior of the heart, on the wobble, on the acute sag during a given breath, on the state you can enter in a minute and hold for 5. It is not, by itself, a lever that resets the whole thermostat of your resting pulse over weeks. Those are different machines, tuned by different things, and confusing them is how people end up disappointed by a practice that was never broken, only misunderstood. So keep them apart in your mind, gently, as you lie there. Tonight, right now, the breath is a lever on the moment. It reaches into this single minute and presses the brake and lets your heart lean down toward rest. That is the thing that is true and provable and yours to use whenever the dark gets loud. What it does over a lifetime, over a month of quiet mornings, is a slower and subtler question, and we will come to it. But the gift of the next long exhale is not slow or subtle at all. It is happening in your chest as I speak. Let me sit for a while with that distinction, because it is the kind of thing that clears up a whole tangle of confusion once you really see it. Picture 2 different clocks. One of them is a fast little clock, ticking through the seconds, and its hands jump and quiver with every breath you take. That is the moment-to-moment heart, the wobble, the thing that dips on your exhale tonight. The other clock is enormous and slow, and its hands barely seem to move at all, and what it measures is where your pulse settles when you are not doing anything in particular. Where it sits when you wake at dawn, where it drifts when you are simply reading or waiting for water to boil. Those 2 clocks are wound by different springs. The fast one you can reach with a single breath. The slow one answers to years of walking and sleeping and the general condition of your whole animal body. When those Stanford volunteers breathed their long, slow sighs for a month, the fast clock was surely dancing every single day. But the slow clock, the resting rate, did not budge. And that is not a failure. That is the machinery telling you honestly which lever you are pulling. Now think about what it would even mean for a breathing exercise to drop your resting rate over a month. You would be asking the exhale to do the work that a training run does, to thicken the heart's own reserve, to make each squeeze push more blood so the heart can afford to beat less often. That is a structural change, a rebuilding, and breath alone does not rebuild the muscle. What breath does, beautifully, immediately, is change the conversation the brain is having with the heart in this instant. It leans on the nerve. It opens the little potassium doors. It does not rebuild the house. It just for a moment opens a window and lets the cool air in, and you can open that window whenever you like. Here is something I find quietly wonderful about all of this, and I want you to hold it loosely as you drift. The heart, left entirely to itself, without a single nerve attached, does not stop. You could lift it clean out of the body, and for a while it would go on beating, all by itself at a pace of its own choosing. There is a little patch of tissue up near the top of it, that sinoatrial node we keep returning to, and those cells are not content to sit still. They leak. They drift. Each one, on its own, slowly charges itself up toward the threshold where it fires, like a bucket under a dripping tap that tips over when it fills, empties, and begins to fill again. Drip, tip, drip, tip. That is the heart's own rhythm, and left alone it runs faster than the pace you live at. Something like 100 beats a minute, maybe more. Faster than your resting pulse right now. So stop and taste that oddity for a second. Your natural, untouched heart wants to beat faster than it actually does. The pace you are lying at tonight is slower than the heart, by itself, would choose, which means something is holding it back. Something is standing over that dripping tap with a hand on the valve, slowing the drip all day, all night, without ever letting go. And you already know who that is. It is the wandering nerve, murmuring its steady stream of acetylcholine down onto those pacemaker cells, keeping the potassium doors cracked open just enough to drag the drip slower than it would otherwise go. That is what we mean when we say the brake is always on. Not sometimes. Always. Even now, in the deepest calm, there is a foot resting on the pedal, and the whole reason your resting pulse is a gentle 60-something and not a racing 100 is that the foot never fully lifts. You can prove this, and the proof is almost violent in how clear it is. Give a person a drug that blocks the muscarinic receptor. Atropine. The very stuff once dripped into eyes to widen the pupil. It walks up to those little M2 locks on the pacemaker cells and jams itself into them so the acetylcholine key can no longer turn. And the moment you do that, the moment you sever that murmured conversation, the heart leaps. It bolts upward, 30, 40 beats a minute, because you have taken the foot off the brake and the tap is free at last to drip at its own frantic pace. The heart was never being pushed to go fast. It was simply released. All that speed was there the whole time, held down by the nerve, and the drug just let it loose. I love this because it flips the ordinary picture on its head. We tend to imagine that when we get frightened, some accelerator floors the heart and drives it up. And there is an accelerator, the sympathetic side, the adrenaline, and it does its part. But a great deal of the fast heartbeat of fear and effort is not the accelerator flooring down. It is the brake letting go. The nerve stops murmuring, the foot lifts, and the heart simply does what it always wanted to do, which is run. So the slow pulse of your quiet body tonight is not the natural state of the heart at all. It is an achievement. It is the constant, patient work of a nerve holding a wild little engine on a short leash, and you never feel it happening. Now bring the breath back into this, because here is where it gets lovely. If the brake is always on, then the breath is not switching it on and off. The breath is leaning on it. It is pressing the pedal a little harder on the exhale and easing it a little on the inhale. That is the wobble. That is your respiratory heart rate variability, the thing the experts now want to rename so nobody mistakes it for a disease. When you breathe in, the nerve's murmur quiets, the foot lifts a touch, and the heart speeds. When you breathe out, the murmur swells, the foot presses, and the heart leans down toward rest. And when you make the exhale long, you are simply holding the pedal down longer than you release it. You are spending more of each cycle with the brake pressed than with it lifted. Over a minute, that tips the balance. The average leans down. Your pulse settles, and it settles not because you have added anything, not because you have flooded yourself with some new calming substance, but because you have given the nerve a longer turn at the wheel. The exhale is the brake's moment. Make the exhale long, and you make the brake's moment long. There is a kind of thrift in it that pleases me. You are not manufacturing calm. You are just arranging the timing so that the calming machinery, which is running anyway, gets more of the clock. Let me push on the mechanism once more, gently, because there is a subtlety in the timing that most people never notice, and it is the reason a long exhale feels different from just breathing slowly in general. Remember that the acetylcholine, once it lands, does not linger. There is an enzyme sitting right there in the cleft, acetylcholinesterase, whose only job is to chop the messenger apart the instant it is spoken. This is why a single burst down the nerve mostly affects the very next beat and not the ones after. The message is written and erased almost in the same breath. So the heart is not coasting on some slow reservoir of calm chemical. It is being told, beat by beat, moment by moment, how fast to go. The brake is not a thing you set and forget. It is a hand that must keep pressing, because the pressure drains away the instant the pressing stops. That is why the timing of the exhale matters at the fine grain. During that long breath out, the nerve is firing steadily, the acetylcholine is landing on beat after beat after beat, and because each message is fresh, each beat in turn is slowed. It is not one push that carries you. It is a rapid series of small pushes, one for every heartbeat, each one written and erased in its own instant. The long exhale simply keeps the pen moving, and the fastness of the erasing, which might seem like a flaw, a leak, a waste, is actually what gives the system its exquisite responsiveness. Because the message fades so fast, the heart can change its mind within a single beat. It is always current. It is never stale. The heart you have right now is being negotiated drip by drip in real time, and the exhale is your quiet vote in that negotiation. There is a delay in it, we said, something like a tenth of a second, maybe a bit more, from the moment the nerve fires to the moment the potassium doors swing and the pacemaker cell drops lower. 100, 150 milliseconds. That sounds slow next to the lightning speed of nerves that move your muscles, which act in a fraction of that. But it is not slow for its purpose. It is fast enough to reach into the very next beat, to catch the drip before it tips. And there is a strange precision hidden in exactly when the message arrives inside the heartbeat's own cycle. Land the vagal burst early, in the first sliver of the beat, around 50 to 70 milliseconds in, and you get the greatest stretching of that beat, the biggest pause. Land it later, past the halfway mark of that first fraction of a second, and the effect slips to the beat after. The heart is, in a sense, listening for the message at particular moments of its own rhythm, more receptive at some phases than others. It is not a dumb valve. It is a listener with a sense of timing. And your slow exhale, without your ever knowing it, is playing into that timing. Breath and heartbeat fall into a kind of loose duet. The long, slow rhythm of the lungs and the quicker rhythm of the heart, nested one inside the other, the slow pressing of the brakes shaping which beats get stretched and which slip past. You are conducting an orchestra you cannot see, in the dark, with nothing but the length of your own breathing out. And the wonderful thing, the thing to carry down towards sleep, is that you do not have to conduct it well. You do not have to get the milliseconds right. The system was built to find the timing on its own. All you supply is the long, slow, unhurried breath out, and the ancient machinery underneath does the fine work, beat by beat, message by fading message, all the way down. Think for a moment about what it means that the heart even can be stretched like this, that it has slack in it at all. A cheap machine has no slack. A cheap machine does one thing at one speed, and if you want it to do something else, you build a different machine. But your heart was never a machine of that kind. It was built from the very beginning to be negotiable, and the man who holds the other end of the negotiation is that quiet gatekeeper in the back of the skull, in the nucleus ambiguus, sending its slow chemical requests down the wandering wire, and the whole beautiful argument is settled molecule by molecule at the little knot of tissue we call the sinoatrial node. Let me stay with that node a while longer, because it is worth loving. It is a small patch of specialized cells sitting up in the wall of the right upper chamber of the heart, and it is doing something that almost nothing else in your body does. It is deciding entirely on its own when to fire. Cut every nerve to it, and it would still beat. Take it out and keep it warm and fed in a dish, and it would go on ticking patiently at a pace of its own choosing, a little faster than the rate you feel in your chest at rest. That is a strange fact, and I want you to sit with the strangeness. The steady thump you have felt your whole life is not the heart's natural free-running speed. Left completely to itself, the node would run quicker than that. The reason your resting pulse is slower is that the brake is always on. Always. Even now, in the calm dark, that quiet stream of acetylcholine is dripping onto the node, whispering slow down, and the node is obeying. And the slowness you feel is not the absence of effort, but the presence of a restraint. We prove that, you know, with a poison. There is a substance called atropine, and what it does is very simple and very rude. It sits in the M2 muscarinic receptor, the very lock that acetylcholine is meant to open, and it plugs the keyhole. It fits the lock, but it does not turn it. And when you give a healthy person atropine, the heart does not slow. It races. It jumps up, sometimes by 30 or 40 beats a minute, and it does that because you have not added anything, you have only taken the brake away. You have cut the whisper. And the node, suddenly hearing no one telling it to be calm, goes back to its own faster, natural pace. So the everyday quiet of your resting heart is not silence. It is a hand held gently but constantly on a lever, and your long exhale, all it does is press that same lever a little harder for a little longer. Now I want to widen the picture, because so far I have kept us mostly inside one chamber, one node, one molecule at a time. Pull back and look at the whole loop, the full circle of the thing, because there is a second story running alongside the first, and the two of them braid together in a way that is almost too neat to believe. When you draw a breath in, the chest expands, and inside the chest the pressure falls, just slightly below the pressure of the room. And that little drop of pressure does something mechanical, something you can feel is sensible even without any nerves at all. It sucks. The great veins bringing blood back toward the heart sit inside that chest, and when the pressure around them falls, blood is drawn in a touch more eagerly toward the right side of the heart. More blood arriving on the right, and for a beat or two, a little less making it all the way around and out the left. And so, at the very moment of inhaling, the pressure of the blood in your arteries dips, ever so gently. Your body has watchmen posted for exactly this. In the wall of the great artery arching out of the heart, and in the walls of the arteries running up either side of your neck toward the brain, there are little stretched sensors, and their whole job in life is to feel how hard the blood is pushing against the wall. We call them baroreceptors, which only means pressure catchers. When the pressure is high, they fire fast, and they send that news up into the brainstem into a listening post called the nucleus tractus solitarius. And when the pressure dips, as it does on every inhale, they fall quiet. They fire less, and that fall in their chatter is itself a message. Fewer signals from the pressure catchers means the brainstem eases off the vagal brake, and so the heart is allowed to quicken. There it is again, from a completely different direction, arriving at the same door. The heart speeds on the inhale, it slows on the exhale. Two mechanisms, the central one coming down from the brain's own breathing rhythm, and this pressure one coming up from the arteries, both pointing the same way, both leaning on the same lever, both stretching the same beats. And here is where it becomes something more than a coincidence of plumbing. Here is where the whole system reveals that it has, in a sense, a favorite tempo. Because this pressure loop, this circle that runs from artery to brainstem to vagus to heart to blood pressure and back around to the artery again, takes time to go around. Every step has its delay. The blood takes time to move. The nerves take their little 100-odd milliseconds to carry the word. The heart takes a beat or two to answer. Add up all those small patiences, and the round trip of the loop comes to something in the neighborhood of 10 seconds. And any loop that takes about 10 seconds to go around has, buried in it, a natural rhythm. It likes to swing at a period of about 10 seconds, which is to say, about 6 times a minute. Now put the two things next to each other. The loop wants to swing 6 times a minute. And what happens if you choose deliberately to breathe 6 times a minute? You breathe in time with the loop. You push the swing exactly when the swing wants to be pushed. Every child on a playground swing knows this in the body long before anyone gives it a name. You do not shove harder to go higher, you shove in time. A small push, given at just the right instant, again and again, adds and adds until the swing is soaring, and a big push given at the wrong instant does nothing but jar your arms. That is resonance. That single idea that a system will drink up energy greedily when you feed it at its own natural rhythm and shrug the energy off when you feed it at any other is one of the deepest and most useful ideas in all of physics, and here it is, living inside your chest, waiting for you to find it. So when you slow your breathing down toward 5 or 6 breaths a minute, you are not merely breathing slowly. You are tuning yourself to the resonant frequency of your own cardiovascular system. You are finding the pitch at which the whole loop rings like a struck glass. The rise and fall of your heart rate, which at ordinary breathing is a modest little ripple, swells and swells until it becomes a great slow wave, the biggest swing in heart rate your resting body can make. The pressure rises and falls in sympathy. The pressure catchers in the arteries fire and fall silent in great sweeping cycles. Everything moves together, in phase, feeding the swing. And the strange gift of it is that this is the state in which the vagal brake is being worked hardest and most rhythmically. the state in which that quiet gatekeeper is most fully in the conversation with the heart. I told you before that each of us has a slightly different tempo where this rings most cleanly, somewhere between about 4.5 and 7 breaths a minute, and for most people right around 5.5. And now perhaps you can feel why it must be a little different for each person. The loop's natural period depends on the size of you, on how long your arteries are, on how far the blood must travel, on the particular delays in your particular nerves. A tall person and a small child do not have quite the same 10 seconds. So the tempo is personal, the way of voice is personal, a resonance set by the plumbing you happen to have been built with. You cannot read your exact number off a chart. You can only feel your way toward it, slowing and slowing until the breathing feels like it is falling into a groove that was already cut, waiting. And above that groove, if you breathe too fast, the whole effect crumbles. I mentioned that landmark measurement from 1981, the one that found a corner, a frequency of about 7 and a fraction breaths a minute, above which the swing in heart rate shrinks away steadily the faster you go. Feel why that must be so. If you try to push the playground swing twice for every one time it wants to swing, your pushes start landing when the swing is coming back at you. You are fighting your own earlier push. The energy no longer adds, it cancels. Breathe fast and shallow, the way a frightened animal breathes, and your inhale break and your pressure loop and your brainstem rhythm all start stepping on each other, arriving out of time, blurring into a small nervous flutter instead of a great clean wave. The heart's slowing power on the exhale gets buried under the hurry. This is why you cannot rush your way to calm. The very tempo of alarm defeats the mechanism that would soothe it. You have to slow down enough to let the loop find its swing, and there is no shortcut through the corner, no way to go fast and get there. The system simply will not resonate on demand at the wrong speed. So we have this beautiful picture of a swing that only answers to the right tempo, and you would think, having come this far, that the whole story is simply this: breathe slow, stretch the exhale, and the heart obeys. And for a long time I would have told you exactly that, with a straight face, and felt quite pleased with myself. But nature has a habit of waiting until you are comfortable and then tapping you on the shoulder. Because when careful people went into the laboratory to test the obvious thing turned around and argued with them. Let me tell you about 2 experiments that sat down at the same table and could not agree. The first one, from a few years back, took 28 people and asked them to breathe at their own natural pace. Whatever pace felt right for each body, but with a twist. Breathe in for a count, and then breathe out for twice as long. 2 parts out for every 1 part in, and they measured that jittery, healthy, beat-to-beat variation in the heart, the thing we have been circling all evening, the little tremble that tells you the vagus is alive and working. And what they found is just what your intuition wants. The 2-to-1 breathing, the long exhale, gave a bigger, richer variation than breathing in and out in equal halves. The heart's swing grew wider, and here is the part I find lovely. When the people stopped doing the exercise, the effect did not vanish like a light switching off. The calm lingered. For something like 4 minutes afterward, the parasympathetic tone, the resting break, stayed lifted above where it had started. The body kept humming the tune for a while after the music stopped. So there it is. Longer exhale wins. Case closed, you might say. Except a different group, more recently, ran what looks on paper like almost the same experiment and got almost the opposite answer. They took their volunteers, 2 small groups, and they too compared equal breathing against a long exhale. But they were very strict about one thing. They pinned the total breathing rate. Both groups, the equal breathers and the long exhalers, were held at exactly 6 breaths a minute. Same number of breaths, same total time per cycle, only the shape inside the cycle was different. And when they measured the heart's variation, the fancy statistics, all the different ways we have of counting that beat-to-beat wobble, they found nothing. No meaningful difference. The long exhale did not beat the equal breath. When both were already parked down at that gorgeous slow resonance tempo, the ratio stopped mattering. Now stop and sit with that, because it is a genuine puzzle and I do not want to paper over it. 2 honest experiments. One says the long exhale is the hero. The other says the long exhale is beside the point, and the slow tempo was doing all the work all along. When you meet a contradiction like this, the worst thing you can do is pick the answer you like and forget the other one. The best thing you can do is ask what was different between the two rooms. And the difference is staring at us. In the first experiment, people breathed at their own natural rate, and for most people, a natural rate is faster than 6 a minute. So when you stretch the exhale there, you are doing two things at once. You are lengthening the out-breath, yes, but you are also sneakily slowing the whole breath down. A longer exhale means a longer cycle, means fewer breaths per minute. You have quietly walked the person down toward that magic slow tempo without announcing it. In the second experiment, they had already walked everybody down to 6 a minute before they started. The room was already at resonance. And once you are standing at the bottom of the valley, it no longer matters which path you took to get there. You are already there. So maybe, and I say maybe because we do not have this nailed shut, the long exhale is not a separate magic ingredient at all. Maybe it is mostly a trick, a very good trick, a natural and easy trick for getting a nervous person to slow down without having to think about slowing down. Tell somebody to breathe out slowly and gently and completely, and they cannot help but take fewer breaths. The exhale is the handle. The slow tempo is the door it opens. That would reconcile our two quarreling experiments rather neatly, and it would explain why the folk wisdom is right, even if its stated reason is a little off. The advice works. The explanation people give for why it works may be pointing at the wrong culprit. I love this kind of thing, because it is science being honest about itself in real time. Nobody is lying. Nobody is sloppy. Two good measurements simply illuminate two different corners of the same room, and the job of understanding is to walk around until you can see how both corners belong to one shape. And notice, please, that even in the middle of the disagreement, both experiments agree on the thing that matters to you lying there in the dark. Slow, gentle, unhurried breathing lifts the vagal brake. They only quarrel about the fine print of why. Then there is the largest and most careful of these efforts. A study that took more than 100 people, 111 of them, and did something patient and rigorous. It did not just measure them for 5 minutes and send them home. It gave 4 different groups, 4 different breathing practices, and asked each person to do their assigned practice 5 minutes a day, every day, for a whole month. One group did a slow, deliberate breathing where you hold the breath in a square, in and hold, and out and hold, all even. One group breathed hard and fast on purpose, a kind of stirring up rather than a calming down. One group did quiet sitting meditation, watching the breath without steering it, and one group did what they call cyclic sighing, which is really just our long exhale dressed in its Sunday clothes. You take a breath in through the nose, and then a second little sip of air on top of it to fill the lungs completely, right to the brim, and then you let it all out through the mouth, slow and long and complete. The exhale is the star. It is a sigh deliberately performed over and over. And after a month, the sighing group came out ahead, not dramatically, not like a thunderclap, but clearly and measurably. Their mood, the plain everyday sense of feeling good, climbed the most, a little more each day than the meditation group managed, and the meditation group was doing perfectly well. Almost 2 points of daily improvement for the sighers against a bit over 1 for the meditators. And here is a detail I want you to hold on to, because it is a quiet fingerprint of the mechanism we have spent all this time building. The sighing group was the only one of the 4 whose resting breathing rate actually came down over the month. They were not just calmer in the 5 minutes of practice. Their whole baseline drifted slower. The body took the lesson and kept it. The daytime background rhythm of their breathing settled into a gentler pace all on its own without anyone telling them to breathe slowly the rest of the day. But now I have to be scrupulous with you, because this is where the title of tonight's talk needs a little honest trimming. In that same big study, over that whole month, the resting heart rate did not budge. Not in the sighers, not in the meditators, not in any of the 4 groups. And I can hear you thinking, wait, you have spent hours telling me the heart slows down when I breathe out, and now you tell me the resting heart rate did not change. Have you been fooling me? No. And the reconciliation of this is one of the most important things I can leave you with, so let me be very careful. There are 2 entirely different quantities hiding under the same 3 words, heart rate. One is the fast one, the living tremble, the thing that rises on this inhale and sinks on this exhale, all within a single breath, the swing we have been chasing all night. That one absolutely responds to your breathing, right now, tonight, in seconds. That is real, and you can feel it. The other is the slow one, the long-run average, the number a nurse writes down, your resting pulse smoothed out over minutes and days. That one is a deeper, more stubborn property of your whole body, your fitness, your age, your heart muscle, your baseline chemistry. 5 minutes a day of sighing for a month does not necessarily drag that stubborn average down. It changes the shape of the wobble around the average far more than it moves the average itself. So when the title promises your heart rate drops, it is telling the truth about the fast quantity, the beat-to-beat deceleration on the exhale within that one calm minute. It is not promising to remake your lifelong resting pulse overnight, and I would rather you love the true smaller marvel than believe a bigger one that isn't so. And even that fast marvel, that within the breath slowing, is not the only gift the long exhale hands you, because the same slow breathing that widens the heart swing seems to reach up and touch the thinking part of you as well. There is a small study I keep turning over in my mind where people were given a genuinely demanding task, business decisions, the kind of judgment call where there is a right answer and a wrong one, and you have to hold several things in your head at once. And before the task, some of them spent just 2 minutes, only 2, breathing slowly with a stretched out exhale. 2 minutes. And afterward that variation in the heart had climbed, as we would now expect, but the thing that catches my attention is that they also got more of the answers right. More correct decisions after 2 minutes of breathing out slowly, and I want you to sit with how strange that is, because we do not usually think that the way air moves in and out of a bag of muscle in your chest has anything to do with whether you picked the right answer on a hard problem. We imagine thinking happens up in the head, sealed off, a private room, but the head is fed by the same nerve that steadies the heart, that wandering nerve running down from the brainstem, and when you calm the traffic on that line, something upstream seems to settle too. 2 minutes of a longer breath out, and the judgment sharpens a little. I do not want to oversell it. It was a small group of people, and one study is one study, and the honest scientist keeps a little door open marked maybe. But it points in a direction that keeps turning up, that the slow exhale is not only a trick for the heart, it is a message the whole nervous system reads. Now let me bring you back down to the chest, to something you can measure with a cuff on your arm, because the heart rate is not the only thing that softens when you stretch the breath out. There was a study, 48 healthy adults, young people mostly, around 27 years old on the average, and the pattern they breathed was a simple one. In through the nose for 4 seconds, a little pause, a hold, for 2 seconds, then out through the mouth for 4 seconds, round and round, about 6 of those cycles every minute for 5 minutes, nothing exotic. Anyone lying where you are lying could do it. And before they started, their hearts were beating, on the average a little under 79 times a minute. 78 and a bit. And right after the 5 minutes were done, the very same hearts were beating just under 70 times a minute. Not quite 70. A drop of almost 9 beats. 9 beats a minute, wiped away by nothing more than the pattern of the air. Sit with that number for a moment, because 9 beats a minute is not nothing. That is your heart, doing measurably less work, cooling its pace, and you did not swallow anything, you did not run anywhere, you did not lie down any flatter than you already are. You just spent the air slowly. And here is the honest part, the part I love, because it keeps us truthful. 5 minutes after they stopped, when they measured again, the rate had drifted back up. Not all the way, but up. It had climbed to about 72.5. So some of the gift began to slip away the moment they let the breathing go back to its ordinary wandering. That tells you exactly what this is. It is not a permanent resetting of the machine. It is a state you enter while you are doing the thing, and linger in for a little while after, and then gently leave. It is more like standing in the shade than like painting the house a cooler color. Step out of the shade and the sun finds you again. But oh, while you are in it. And the cuff on the arm told the same story in a different language. Their blood pressure, the top number, the push of the blood at the peak of each beat, came down. It started near 119 and settled to about 113. A drop of nearly 6 of those units the doctors use, those millimeters of mercury. And the lower number, the resting pressure between beats, came down too, from around 76 to nearly 73. Smaller, but real, 3 units and change. And the people who did this work explained it in just the language we have been building all along. Enhanced parasympathetic activity, they said. The vagal brake pressed a little more firmly. Augmented cardiovagal reflexes. A more sensitive baroreflex, that pressure-sensing loop wound tighter and more responsive. And less push from the other side, the sympathetic side, the accelerator eased off. Everything we have talked about, the gatekeeper in the medulla, the wandering wire, the chemical key in the pacemaker door, the resonance in the pressure loop, all of it, showing up as 2 softer numbers on a cuff. So now let me finally settle a debt. Because the promise hanging over this whole long talk has a number in it, and that number is 60 seconds. 1 minute, and you deserve an honest accounting of what 1 minute can and cannot do. What can happen inside a single minute is the fast thing, the real thing, the thing we spent the first half of the night taking apart. Within a minute of settling into a long, slow, drawn-out exhale at that unhurried pace of 5 or 6 breaths, the swing of your heart opens up. Every time you breathe out, the gate in your brainstem swings open, the acetylcholine spills onto the pacemaker, the little potassium doors open, the cell leaks its charge and drifts more slowly toward the next beat, and the interval between one beat and the next stretches longer. Beat, and wait, and beat. You can feel it if you lay 2 fingers on the pulse at your wrist or your throat and simply breathe out long and empty. The pulse slows under your fingers as the air leaves you. That is not a promise about a month from now. That is happening in the next handful of breaths. That is a thing a minute can genuinely give you. What a minute cannot do, and what I will not pretend it does, is reach in and reset the number your heart returns to when you stop paying attention. That resting pace, the one your body keeps while you sleep and while you forget you have a heart at all, that is a slower creature to move. Remember the careful month-long study, the one with 111 people trying their 4 different breathing styles, 5 minutes a day for a whole month. And remember that even after a month, the resting heart rate had not budged in any of the 4 groups. Not one. That is the same truth the 48 adults showed us when their rate crept back up 5 minutes after they stopped. The within-the-breath slowing is fast and vivid, and yours in a minute. The lifelong baseline is patient and stubborn and does not care about 1 good minute. Both things are true at once, and a person who tells you only the first half is selling you something, and a person who tells you only the second half has missed the small daily marvel that is actually there for the taking. And I find I do not mind the honest smallness of it. In fact, I have come to prefer it. Because the thing that is real, the beat-to-beat widening on the exhale, is available to you every single night at no cost, requiring nothing you are not already going to do. You have to breathe anyway. You are breathing right now, whether you attend to it or not, thousands upon thousands of times between now and morning. The only thing this whole night of talk asks of you is that, for a little while, you spend the outgoing half of a few of those breaths more slowly than the incoming half. Let the air in gently. Let the air out more gently still, twice as slowly if you can, unhurried, unforced, until the chest is soft and nearly empty, and then let the next breath find its own way in without your grabbing at it. Now I want to widen the frame again, one more time, because there is something almost tender in how old and how shared this machinery is. This coupling of the breath and the heart, this rising on the inhale and falling on the exhale, it is not a peculiar talent of human beings. It is not something we cleverly invented or trained. It is found across the air-breathing animals, the ones with lungs running back deep into the family tree of vertebrates. The frog has a version of it. The bird has it. The dog dreaming at the foot of the bed has it, its ribs rising and falling, its heart swinging along in time. It is what the careful people call phylogenetically conserved, which is a long phrase meaning nature found this arrangement a very long time ago and has kept it, because keeping it mattered. And that alone should tell you it is no mere accident, no idle wobble in the plumbing. When evolution holds on to a thing across hundreds of millions of years and across creatures as different from you as a lizard, the thing is doing work worth doing. And the amount of that swing, the size of the difference between the fast inhale heart and the slow exhale heart, turns out to be a kind of report card on the machine. It is largest in the young and in the fit. The healthy child, the well-conditioned body, shows a big, generous, open swing between the breathing in pace and the breathing out pace. And when the machine is in trouble, the swing narrows and can nearly vanish. In the failing heart, in the heart worn down by chronic high pressure, the beautiful oscillation flattens toward a dull, unvarying tapping, a metronome after all, but not because that is healthy. Because the responsiveness has been lost. So the very fluctuation that a careless person might have called noise or imperfection or an irregular heartbeat to be fixed is in truth a sign of a nervous system supple enough to answer moment by moment to the tides of the breath. The steadiness of illness looks orderly. The health looks like restlessness. And once you know that, you can never again look at a perfectly even pulse the way you did before. So let me sit with that a little longer, because it turns you upside down. All your life you were handed a picture of the good heart as the reliable heart, the one that ticks without complaint. The same beat, the same beat, the same beat, like a good employee who never surprises the boss. And here comes the machinery to tell you the opposite. The heart that is worth having is the one that argues gently with itself all day long. It speeds a touch on the way in, it eases a touch on the way out, and it does this thousands upon thousands of times between waking and sleeping, without ever asking your permission, without you noticing, without you having the faintest idea it was going on. You have been carrying a small tide inside your chest for your whole life, and nobody told you. And here is a thing I love about this, a thing that has the flavor of the best physics. Nature did not invent this trick once, in us, and leave it there. This little conversation between breath and heartbeat shows up all across the living world. Every animal that pulls air into a lung and lets it back out again carries some version of the same rhythm. The fish gulping at the surface, the lizard on the warm rock, the bird, the dog asleep by the fire with its ribs rising and falling, the child, the old man. It is ancient. It has been conserved, as the biologists like to say, meaning that evolution found it a very long time ago and kept it, generation after generation, because it was worth keeping. When you find one gadget built into creatures separated by hundreds of millions of years of history, you may be quite sure it is not an accident. It is doing a job. And the job is this coupling, this letting the pump listen to the bellows so the two of them can work as partners instead of strangers. Now I want to be honest with you about a small quarrel over words, because it is the kind of quarrel that tells you something real about how science cleans up after itself. For a long time, this fluctuation had a rather alarming name. People called it a sinus arrhythmia. Arrhythmia. The word sounds like something is wrong. It sounds like the thing a worried person goes to the doctor about. And that name was a leftover, a piece of old vocabulary from a time when any departure from the steady tick looked like a fault in the clock. But we have just spent all this time discovering that this particular departure is not a fault at all. It is the signature of a healthy, responsive, well-tuned system. So not long ago, in the year 2025, a panel of experts from around the world got together and made a modest proposal. They said, look, let us stop frightening people with the word arrhythmia for something that is normal and good. Let us call it respiratory heart rate variability instead. Just a change of name. But behind the change of name is the whole story we have been telling. The thing was misnamed because it was misunderstood, and once it was understood, the old name no longer fit. That is how the language of science slowly bends itself to match the truth, one stubborn word at a time. There is a way of thinking about all this that some people find useful, and I want to give it to you carefully, because it is a picture, an interpretation, and I do not want you to swallow it as though it were a measured fact. Some researchers describe the vagus, that wandering wire we spoke of, as a kind of brake on the heart. Not a brake you slam, a brake you rest your foot on, lightly, all the time. The idea is that at rest your heart, left entirely to its own devices, its own pacemaker cells doing their own spontaneous ticking, would actually run faster than it does. Faster than the beat you feel now. And the reason it does not race is that the vagus is always there, always pressing gently, always releasing that little chemical, the acetylcholine, onto the pacemaker, always holding the pace down a notch. A steady drizzle of restraint, and you can prove that the brake is really there, really engaged, really doing something at this very moment, with a rather dramatic experiment that I would not recommend you try. There is a drug called atropine. Atropine goes and blocks the very docking site, the muscarinic receptor, where the acetylcholine was supposed to land. It jams the keyhole so the key cannot turn. And when you give a resting person atropine, when you cut that quiet vagal restraint, the heart does not stay where it was, it jumps up. The rate climbs sharply, as though a hand that had been resting on the reins the whole time suddenly let go, which tells you something you might never have guessed by taking your own pulse. The calm, resting heartbeat you feel is not the heart at idle. It is the heart held back. It is a fast engine with a foot on the brake. And the whole art of the slow exhale, the whole reason any of this matters to a person lying in the dark, is that the long breath out is a way of leaning, ever so slightly, on that pedal. So picture what is really happening on the out-breath now with everything we have gathered. You begin to let the air go. Up in the brainstem, in that huddle of cells behind and to the side, the pattern generator eases off the signal that had been silencing the cardiac neurons. The silence lifts. The neurons in the nucleus ambiguus wake back up and begin to fire. Down the wandering wire the message travels all that long way from skull to chest. At the little knob of pacemaker tissue the nerve endings sprinkle their acetylcholine. The chemical drifts across the tiny gap, finds the receptors, and through that patient chain we described, the potassium gates swing open. Potassium streams out of the pacemaker cells. The inside of each cell tips more negative, sinks a little further from the threshold where the next beat would fire, and climbs back toward that threshold more slowly, more lazily, taking its sweet time. And so the interval between one beat and the next grows longer. The heart, on the exhale, coasts. Not because you willed each beat, because you let a breath out slowly. And a machine older than your species did the rest. And all of that, mind you, unfolds inside the space of a single breath. Not over minutes. Not over an hour of practice. The muscarinic pathway is slow as nerve pathways go, 100 to 150 thousandths of a second from the nerve burst to the first stirring at the node, which sounds sluggish next to the lightning-quick junctions elsewhere in the body. But your heart beats about once a second, and 150 thousandths of a second is a small slice of that. So the brake has time to land inside the very same beat, or at worst the next one. The system is quick enough to whisper to each heartbeat individually, one at a time, on the time scale of the breath itself. That is why you do not have to wait and hope. That is why, when the studies put people on the slow cadence and watched, the swing between the fast inhale pace and the slow exhale pace showed up right away, breath by breath, plain in the record. I find there is something almost tender in the numbers here, and I want to linger on it before we go on. Think again of those 48 ordinary people in that little study, average age not quite 27, nothing special about them, sitting there breathing on a slow count for 5 minutes. Their hearts came down from about 79 beats a minute to about 70, a drop of nearly 9 beats, just from breathing in a particular unhurried way. And their blood pressure eased as well, the top number sliding down by about 6, the bottom by about 3.5. No pill. No exertion, no machine strapped to them, only air going in a little and coming out a lot at a pace of about 6 breaths a minute. And then, when they stopped, the effect began quietly to fade. 5 minutes later, the rate had drifted partway back up, towards 72. Which is not a disappointment. It is a clue. It tells you this is a state you visit, not a place you move into. You lean on the brake and the heart slows. You take your foot off and it drifts back to where it lives. The breath is a lever you can reach for whenever you like and let go of whenever you like. That fading, that gentle return, keeps us honest about what we are really claiming and what we are not. Because here we brush up against a genuine puzzle in the research. The sort of honest disagreement that I would rather show you than hide from you. When people took the extended exhale and practiced it faithfully, day after day for a month, and then measured the plain resting heartbeat, the number you would read sitting quietly having done no breathing exercise at all, they found in the careful trials that it did not really budge. The chronic, everyday resting rate stayed about where it had been, and that seems at first like a contradiction. How can the slow breath drop the heart by 9 beats in one study and change nothing in another? But it is not a contradiction at all, once you see what two different animals we are talking about. One is the fast, living beat-to-beat deceleration that rides on each exhale while you are actually breathing that way. The tide. The other is the long-run average height of the sea when the tide is not being watched. The breath moves the tide powerfully in the moment. It does not necessarily lower the sea. And keeping those two apart, the acute wave and the standing level, is exactly the kind of care that separates a real understanding of the body from a slogan. Think about what that separation quietly buys us. It means the slow breath is not a pill you swallow once and carry around inside you for the rest of the day. It is more like a bell you can ring whenever you choose. Strike it and the sound fills the room. Stop striking and the sound fades, though the room is still faintly humming for a few minutes afterward. The way the 2021 work found the calm lingering about 4 minutes past the last long exhale. And to me there is something rather lovely and honest in that. Nobody is promising you a new heart. What they are showing you is that you own the mallet, and that the bell is always hanging there, in the wiring between your lungs and that little cluster of cells at the back of your skull waiting to be rung. So let me take you back down into the machinery for a moment, because I want to look at a piece of this from a slightly different angle than we did before. We have been talking as though the exhale is the important half, and in a way it is, because that is when the brake comes back on, when the wandering nerve resumes its patient tapping on the pacemaker and the beats spread apart. But I do not want you to fall asleep thinking the inhale is the villain of the story. It is not. The inhale is doing something clever too, and the whole trick only works because the two halves take turns. Here is the thing about taking turns. Imagine you are pushing a child on a swing. If you shoved constantly with a steady, unchanging force, you would get a boring, stiff result. The child hanging at some fixed angle. No motion, no joy. The swing lives because you push and then let go, push and then let go, and, crucially, because you time your pushes to match the swing's own natural rhythm. You feel it. You do not push when the child is coming toward you. You push right as they begin to move away at the bottom of the arc, and each little shove pours a bit more energy into a motion that was already there. That is what breathing slowly does to your circulation. The inhale lets the heart run a little quicker and the pressure sag. The exhale lets the heart slow and the pressure swell back. And when you set the tempo near that magic 5 or 6 breaths in a minute, every breath is a push at the bottom of the arc. You are pumping the swing. The oscillation grows tall, not because you are forcing anything, but because you have found the beat the system already wanted to dance to. And that word, resonance, which we met earlier, is really just the physicist's name for finding the beat something already wants to dance to. Every bridge, every wine glass, every playground swing, every tuned circuit has one. Push at the right rate, and small efforts pile up into large motions. Push at the wrong rate, and your efforts fight each other and cancel out. Your baroreflex, that loop where a dip in pressure begs the heart to speed and a rise in pressure begs it to slow, has a built-in delay in it. A few seconds worth of messages traveling from the pressure sensors in your neck and your great vessels up to the brainstem and back down the wandering nerve. And any loop with a delay like that has a favorite frequency, a rate at which its own lag lines up perfectly with the rhythm you feed it. For the human cardiovascular system, that favorite rate sits right around 1 full breath every 10 or 11 seconds. It is not a coincidence, and it is not mysticism. It is the same reason a particular length of organ pipe sings a particular note. The plumbing has a size, the delays have a length, and out of that geometry falls a preferred tempo. Now I find it genuinely funny, in the good way, that people have been stumbling onto this preferred tempo for centuries without any idea what a baroreceptor was. Slow chanting, long-drawn prayers said on a single breath, the deliberate paced breathing of people trying to steady their hands or their nerves, so much of it lands when you actually count it at something close to 5 or 6 utterances a minute. They were not measuring heart rate variability. They had no notion of potassium channels swinging open in the pacemaker. They just noticed that if you breathe and speak this slowly, you feel a certain way, a settling, a loosening. And the body was quietly running the whole beautiful cascade underneath, the nerve, the acetylcholine, the little gait, the spreading of the beats, entirely without their permission or knowledge. I love that. The physics does not wait for you to understand it. It was working in your grandmother and in her grandmother, in anyone who ever sighed on purpose to calm themselves, long before anyone drew the circuit diagram. But let me be careful and fair, the way we always try to be, because I told you 2 honest studies disagreed about whether the exact 2-to-1 shape of the breath matters, and I do not want to leave that dangling as though it were a tidy little paradox with a bow on it. Let us sit with the disagreement a bit longer, because sitting with a disagreement is where the real thinking happens. On the one side, you have the finding that when people breathed at their own natural pace and simply made the exhale twice as long as the inhale, the beat-to-beat variation and that quick exhale-linked measure of vagal activity both climbed higher than when the breath was even, in and out in equal halves. That is a real result, carefully measured, and it whispers that the shape of the breath, the lopsidedness of it, carries some of the power. Stretch the out-breath, give the brake more time on the wheel each cycle, and you win a little more calm. On the other side, you have the trial that pinned both breathing patterns to exactly 6 breaths a minute, the even one and the long exhale one, and measured the same family of quantities, and found honestly no meaningful difference between them. Both patterns produced lovely big swings in the heartbeat. Neither clearly beat the other. And the people who ran that study drew what I think is a very sensible conclusion. They said, perhaps, when you have already slowed the whole breath down to that resonant tempo, you are already pumping the swing at the bottom of the arc, and the precise ratio of push to release matters far less than the fact that you found the right tempo at all. The tempo is doing the heavy lifting. The ratio is a fine detail on top of it. And do you see, these 2 findings do not actually have to be enemies. Look at what was different between them. In the first, people breathed at their own natural rate, which for many folks is quicker than the resonant 5 or 6. And if you are breathing quicker than resonance, then lengthening the exhale is one of the easiest ways to drag the whole cycle slower and downward toward that sweet spot without having to think about clocks and counts at all. The long exhale in that case might be helping mostly by slowing you down, by nudging you toward the tempo, rather than by some separate magic of its own. In the second study, both groups had already been dragged down to the sweet tempo by design, so the long exhale had no extra slowing left to give, and the difference washed out. That is not 2 experiments contradicting each other. That is 2 experiments, seen together, teaching you something neither could teach alone. They are telling you that the rate is the king and the ratio is the servant. Get the breath slow, down into that 4-second and longer territory for each half, and you have already won most of the prize. The 2-to-1 shape is a wonderfully practical trick for getting slow, because counting to 4 on the way in and to 8 on the way out is easy to remember in the dark, and it lands you almost exactly at 5 breaths a minute without a metronome. But you should not lie there tonight worrying that your exhale was only 1.5 times your inhale instead of exactly twice. The system is far more forgiving than that. It cares that you came down to its tempo. It does not audit your ratios. This is a habit of mind I would love for you to carry out of this talk, more than any single fact about a nerve or a channel. When 2 careful measurements seem to fight, the lazy move is to pick the one you like and call the other one wrong. The interesting move, almost always, is to ask what was different about the 2 situations, and to discover that both results are true, each in its own corner, and that the apparent fight was really a clue pointing at some deeper variable you had not yet named. Here the hidden variable was the breathing rate, sitting quietly underneath both studies, and once you name it, the whole confusion dissolves and you understand the thing better than either study alone could have told you. Nature is not being contradictory. Nature is being consistent in a way you had not yet grasped, and the discomfort you feel at the contradiction is just the feeling of your own understanding being too small, about to grow. Let me pull on one more thread of this, gently, because there is a distinction hiding in all of it that I think is worth turning over slowly as you drift. We keep sliding between two words, and they are not the same word. One is how fast the heart beats, the other is how much the heartbeat varies. And a great deal of confusion in this whole subject comes from letting those two blur into one. The rate is simple. It is the number of beats in a minute, the plain count. The variation is subtler. It is how much the gaps between beats stretch and shrink from one beat to the next. You can have a slow heart that beats like a machine, every gap identical, dead metronomic. And that, oddly, is not the picture of health you might imagine. And you can have a heart beating at a perfectly ordinary rate that is nonetheless breathing, gaps swelling on the exhale and pinching on the inhale, alive and supple and responsive. It is that suppleness, that willingness of the intervals to bend with the breath, that turns out to be the finer sign of a well-tuned nervous system, greater in the young and the fit, and quietly fading in the sick and the strained. When you do your long, slow breathing, you are certainly in the moment dropping the rate. But the deeper thing you are exercising, the thing you are training like a muscle, is the variation. You are stretching the range over which those intervals can flex. You are practicing suppleness. So let me sit with that word a moment, suppleness, because it is a strange thing to call a virtue of the heart. We usually praise a heart for being strong, for being steady, for being reliable. But nature, when you look closely, does not seem to admire steadiness quite the way we do. Nature admires the thing that can bend without breaking, the reed in the wind, the branch that gives and springs back. And the heart that can let its own rhythm loosen and tighten with each breath is showing you, beat by beat, that its brake still works, that the wandering wire still carries a live current, that the gatekeeper at the back of the skull is awake and listening. When that flexibility fades, when the beats line up like fence posts, all identical, all evenly spaced, that is not the heart getting better at its job. That is often the heart losing its conversation with the brain. And here is a thing worth turning over slowly in the dark. This whole arrangement, this breathing of the heartbeat, is not some human peculiarity, some quirk that showed up late in the story. It is old. It is in the fish, in a way, in the reptile, in the bird, in the dog curled at the foot of the bed, in the horse and the mouse and the whale. Every creature that pulls air into a lung and lets it back out again carries some version of this same trick, the heart quickening on the draw and easing on the release. It is what we call phylogenetically conserved, which is a long phrase for a simple idea. It means life found this early and kept it, generation after generation, branch after branch of the tree, because it was worth keeping. When something is that old and that widespread, you should suspect it is not decoration. You should suspect it is doing real work. What work? Well, think about the plumbing again, gently. When you draw a breath in, the chest opens, the pressure inside it drops, and blood is pulled a little more eagerly back toward the heart from the great veins. For a moment, the right side of the heart fills more, and the left side, on the far end of the loop, actually delivers a touch less out into the body on that particular stroke. So the pressure in your arteries dips, just slightly, just for an instant. And there are little sentinels in the walls of your big arteries, in the arch of the aorta, and in the sides of your neck that feel that dip. When the pressure sags, they quiet down, they fire less. And that quieting travels back up to the brainstem and, in effect, lifts the vagal brake a little, and the heart is allowed to speed. Then you breathe out, the pressures reverse, the sentinels fire again, the brake presses back down, and the heart slows. So there are, if you like, two hands on this same steering wheel at once. The central one, the pattern generator firing its rhythm straight down the vagus before the lung has even finished moving. And this slower feedback hand, the pressure sensors reporting what actually happened a beat or two ago. Most of the time they push in the same direction, and the effect adds up into that lovely swelling and shrinking of the pulse. Now you can start to see why the timing of your breathing matters so much, why it is not enough simply to breathe deeply and call it done. Because you have, sitting inside your chest and your arteries and your brainstem, a loop A signal goes out, blood moves, pressure changes, sensors report, the brake adjusts, the pressure changes again. Every loop like that has a natural tempo, a speed at which its own delays line up just right so that each push arrives exactly when it can do the most good. Push a child on a swing and you know this in your bones. If you shove at random, you get nothing but a mess. But find the rhythm of the swing, give your little push right at the top of each arc, and the swings grow and grow with almost no effort. Your breath is that push, the circulation is that swing, and the tempo where they marry, for most people, sits down around 5 or 6 breaths in a whole minute. Slow and long and unhurried, the kind of breathing you would never do while talking or hurrying or worrying. Breathe at that pace, and the oscillations in your pressure and your heart rate climb to their fullest. The swing goes as high as it will go. Breathe faster, up past 7 or so breaths a minute, and the pushes start arriving off the beat, out of step with the swing, and the whole lovely resonance falls away. So when somebody tells you to breathe in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 8, listen to what that little recipe is quietly accomplishing. 4 seconds drawing in, 8 seconds letting out, that is 12 seconds for one whole breath, and 12 seconds a breath is 5 breaths in a minute. You did not set out to find the resonance of your own cardiovascular loop. You just followed a simple instruction about counting, but the instruction was built, whether the person handing it to you knew it or not, to drop you right into that sweet slow tempo where the swing goes highest. The long exhale is not only about the exhale, it is also, sneakily, a way of stretching the whole cycle out long enough to land you near that magic pace of 5 or 6 a minute. That is part of why the ratio and the rate get so tangled together, and why honest researchers keep arguing about which one is really doing the lifting. There is an old experiment I find charming for how early it saw this. Back in the middle of the 1980s, 2 investigators, Cappo and Holmes, sat people down and put them in a situation designed to make them a little anxious, a little braced, and then had them breathe in different patterns, all at that same slow 6 breaths a minute. Some breathed in for a long stretch and out for a short one. Some split it evenly, in and out the same. And some did the thing we keep coming back to, a short breath in and a long breath out, roughly 1 part in to 4 parts out. And it was that last group, the long slow exhalers, whose bodies and whose minds settled the most. That was one of the earliest careful attempts to pull apart the ins from the outs and ask which arrangement actually calms a rattled person. And the answer, even then, pointed toward the exhale. Let me give you one more way to feel how deep this break runs, how it is not some occasional visitor, but a permanent presence. You might imagine that at rest, sitting quietly, your heart just beats at its own natural pace and the nervous system only steps in during excitement or fear. That is not so. Even now, lying still, the vagus is pressing gently on the accelerators opposite, holding your heart slower than it would otherwise go. The little pacemaker cluster in your heart, left entirely to itself, with no nerves whispering to it at all, would run considerably faster than your resting pulse. We know this because of a rather blunt experiment. Give a person a drug that blocks the vagal signal at the heart, that plugs the very keyholes the acetylcholine would land in, and the heart does not falter or slow. It leaps up. The rate climbs sharply, because you have taken your foot off a brake you did not even know was pressed. That tells you the parasympathetic hold is not a switch that flicks on when needed. It is a steady pressure, always there, always engaged, quietly restraining the heart every hour of your life. And your slow, long exhale is a way of leaning on that brake a little harder for a little while, on purpose. There are people, and I think they are onto something real, who describe this whole vagal system as a kind of brake precisely because that word captures how it works. It does not push the heart forward. It holds it back, and then relaxes its hold, and then holds again, and it can do so fast, within a single beat, because it runs on those swift myelinated fibers coming down from the nucleus ambiguous. When you are safe, when you are at ease, when you are lying warm and unthreatened in the dark, this brake is engaged, and your heart idles low, and your rhythm breathes freely with your lungs. When something alarms you, the brake lifts in an instant, and the heart is free to race before the slower chemical messengers of stress have even arrived. So in one view, The breathing of your heartbeat is a readout of how safe your body believes it is, moment to moment. And by choosing to breathe slowly and to draw the exhale long, you are, in a sense, sending your own body a message in a language older than words. You are telling it, from the outside in, that it is safe enough to let the heart slow down. I should say plainly, so as not to mislead you as you drift, that the scientists have grown a little uneasy with the old name for all this. For a long while they called it respiratory sinus arrhythmia, and that middle word, arrhythmia, has an unfortunate ring to it, because everywhere else in medicine an arrhythmia is a disorder, a fault, something gone wrong with the beat. But this is the opposite of a fault. This is the sound of a healthy heart doing exactly what a healthy heart should. So not long ago, a gathering of experts proposed setting that troubling word aside and calling it instead, more honestly, respiratory heart rate variability. The breathing of the heartbeat, a normal thing, a good thing, a sign of life working as it should. And I rather like that they bothered, because a name can quietly tell you to fear a thing you ought instead to admire.